What's good, everyone? This is The Fiction Wizard, and boy do we have a treat for you. Amelia Bones raided the Dursleys with 9 Aurors at sunrise. Harry woke up as true lord of 11 stolen noble houses. Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. Sunrise. The alarm clock on Dudley's second bedroom nightstand read 5:47 a.m. when the wards on Privet Drive began to scream. Not audibly, nothing that would wake the neighbors, nothing that would rattle the windows or send Mrs. Fig's cats bolting under the sofa. The scream was purely magical, a frequency that only 2 things on the planet could hear: the enchantments Dumbledore had layered over number 4 like geological strata across 11 years, and the woman who had specifically designed her detection equipment to listen for them. Amelia Bones heard it from the roof of the house 3 streets over, where she'd been standing for the last 40 minutes with a thermos of black coffee going cold in her hand. She set the thermos on the chimney stack with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned, a long time ago, not to waste movement when movement was about to become necessary. "That's our signal," she said. Behind her, 9 Aurors stopped pretending to be patient. They were a specific 9. Not the youngest, not the most aggressive. Amelia had spent 3 days choosing them, cross-referencing service records, financial disclosures, family ties, Wisengamot voting histories of parents and spouses and cousins twice removed. The roster she'd built wasn't just competence. It was loyalty she could prove. Kingsley Shacklebolt stood nearest to her right shoulder, 6 feet 4 inches of absolute calm, his wand already in his hand though nobody had given the order. Tonks was to her left, her hair its natural mousy brown for once, because Amelia had quietly asked her to look official today and Tonks, to her credit, had understood what that meant. The other 7 fanned out in a pattern they drilled twice yesterday in an empty warehouse in Manchester. "Perimeter is sealed?" Amelia asked. "Sealed and layered," said Dawlish, consulting his monitoring orb. "Nobody's operating in or out of a quarter-mile radius without us knowing." "Anti-interdiction?" "Up." "Ministry override blocks?" "All 3. The last one was the one that mattered. Ministry override blocks were exactly what they sounded like, a countermeasure against anyone with high enough ministry clearance using an emergency protocol to dissolve an active Auror operation. It was the kind of thing you put in place when you were worried that the person most likely to interfere with your investigation was also the person most likely to have the authority to do it legally. Amelia didn't say Dumbledore's name. She didn't have to. "Let's go," she said, and stepped off the roof. The Aurors landed on Privet Drive like a quiet storm, 8 points at the perimeter, Tonks and Kingsley flanking Amelia as she walked up the front path of number 4 with the arrest warrants folded in her breast pocket and the particular expression on her face that had made senior ministry officials physically step aside in corridors for the past 15 years. She knocked once. Then, because she was Amelia Bones and she'd once told Cornelius Fudge to his face that patience was a virtue for people with less evidence, she didn't wait. She drew her wand, spoke a 3-word unlocking sequence that dissolved both the Muggle deadbolt and the secondary ward someone had slapped on the door's magical frame, and pushed it open. The hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, smelled like carpet cleaner and resentment. Vernon Dursley came thundering down the stairs approximately 8 seconds later in a tartan dressing gown that had seen better decades, his face cycling through 3 colors of purple before he'd even reached the bottom step. He was a large man, the kind of large that came from comfort rather than strength, and he pulled it around himself like armor as he planted himself at the foot of the staircase. "What the devil? Who are you? This is private property, you can't just..." "Vernon Dursley," Amelia said, and her voice had the quality of a sentence being imposed rather than spoken. "You are under arrest for the sustained neglect, abuse, and unlawful imprisonment of a minor magical citizen of Great Britain." She reached into her pocket and produced the warrant, holding it up the way you'd show a card to someone who'd asked to see it, not someone who'd doubted you. "I have 17 supporting charges. We'll get to those." Vernon went the color of old putty. "Now see here," Kingsley stepped around Amelia with the smooth economy of someone who had done this so many times it had become something close to choreography, and Vernon Dursley stopped talking. People tended to stop talking when Kingsley Shacklebolt got within arm's reach of them. It wasn't a threatening thing, precisely. It was more that he occupied space in a way that made argument seem structurally unsound. Petunia appeared at the top of the stairs in a nightgown and a state of barely contained hysteria. She saw the aura robes, saw the wands, saw Amelia's face, and her hand went to her throat in a gesture so automatic that it looked rehearsed. "You," she whispered. "Not who are you, just you," as though she recognized something, even if she couldn't name it. "Petunia Dursley née Evans," Amelia said. "Secondary charges." Tonks. Tonks produced a second warrant with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been looking forward to this particular moment. Petunia made a sound like a kettle. Dudley Dursley appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, hair flattened on one side, eating a biscuit. He looked at 9 Aurors in his house with the blank-faced incomprehension of a boy who had never once been told that consequences existed. "Mum? Go back to your room, Dudley," Petunia said, her voice strangled. "Actually," said Amelia, "he should stay. Tonks, would you, on it?" Tonks steered Dudley back into the sitting room with a gentleness that was technically gentle and also left absolutely no room for negotiation. Amelia turned back to the staircase and looked up. The door at the end of the upstairs landing, the smallest door, the one with the cat flap, had a series of locks on it that made her stomach clench in a way she hadn't let herself feel yet. She'd known they were there. The reconnaissance report had been thorough. Knowing a thing and seeing it were, however, different categories of experience. "Shacklebolt," she said quietly. "With me." They went up the stairs. The locks were padlocks, 3 of them, the Muggle kind, because of course they were. Magical locks on a room holding a magical child would have tripped any number of monitoring sensors, and whoever had arranged this particular situation had been nothing if not careful about remaining undetectable. Amelia released them with a touch of her wand each, the metal components falling away with soft, definitive clicks. She looked at the cat flap for a moment, the small, hinged slot in the lower panel of the door, clearly designed for passing food through, and she felt something settle in her chest that was neither grief nor fury but lived in the neighborhood of both. She opened the door. The room was small. That was the first thing, and it insisted on being the first thing despite everything else competing for the position. A camp bed. A trunk, battered, with a broken latch. A bird cage in the corner, empty, with a dish of dried-out seeds still in it. A loose floorboard near the window with the edges worn smooth from use. A small desk with schoolbooks stacked on it with the careful, deliberate order of someone who had very few good things and had learned to treat them that way. And Harry Potter, sitting up in the camp bed with his glasses halfway on his face, watching her with eyes that were doing something very specific, not alarmed, not relieved, not even surprised, exactly. More like measuring. More like the eyes of someone who had learned that unexpected things happening in this room were usually bad things, and was gathering data before committing to a response. He was small. Too small. Amelia had been a bones for 60 years of wizarding history, and she knew what 11 looked like, and this was what 11 looked like when 11 had been eating whatever made it through the cat flap and had spent a summer doing what was presumably a significant amount of manual labor in the garden. The glasses were cracked at the bridge. There was a bruise on his forearm, old enough to be yellowing, that he didn't bother to hide because he'd clearly stopped bothering a while ago. "Harry Potter," she said, and she kept her voice absolutely level, because this was not the moment to let him see how angry she was. "My name is Amelia Bones. I'm the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I've come to get you out of here." A beat. The eyes kept measuring. "You're with the Ministry," he said. "Not a question, exactly." "Yes. Dumbledore runs the Ministry." Amelia felt Kingsley shift slightly beside her, and she understood the shift perfectly, because it was the same shift she'd made internally when she'd first read that sentence in the briefing notes she'd compiled on this operation. the particular jolt of hearing an 11-year-old boy articulate the most dangerous and accurate political assessment of post-war Britain in one flat declarative sentence. "Dumbledore has significant influence in the ministry," she said. "He does not run it, and he has no jurisdiction over DMLE operations." "I do." She held his gaze. "I am not here because he sent me. I'm here because I found something he didn't want me to find, and because you have been owed this visit for 11 years. Harry looked at her for another 3 seconds. Then he swung his legs off the camp bed, reached under it for a battered trainer, and pulled it on. "Okay," he said. "Give me 2 minutes." "Take your time," said Amelia. He was ready in 90 seconds. He didn't have much to pack. Downstairs, the sitting room had become something of a controlled chaos. Vernon was in the armchair, not by choice, with a slightly glazed expression that spoke to the effectiveness of a calming charm applied by someone who wasn't being especially gentle about it. Petunia sat on the sofa with her knees pressed together and her hands folded in her lap with the rigid propriety of someone performing not panicking from memory. Dudley was eating another biscuit. Harry came down the stairs and walked through the hallway and did not look at any of them. Petunia looked at him. Something moved in her face, guilt, maybe, or the ghost of it, the fossilized remains of something that had once been a warmer feeling and had been buried under 10 years of willful unkindness. "Harry, Petunia Dursley," Amelia said, stepping into the hallway behind Harry, "you will have an opportunity to speak to your solicitor. I recommend you use it." She put a hand, not unkind, but final, on Harry's shoulder and steered him toward the front door. They were halfway down the front path when Harry stopped. Amelia stopped beside him. He was looking at the garden. At the flower beds, specifically, which were immaculate, the way that things are immaculate when someone has spent significant time making them so under conditions they would not have chosen. His face was doing that measuring thing again. "My owl," he said. "Hedwig. They put her in the garage." "Tonks," Amelia said over her shoulder. 40 seconds later, Tonks came around the side of the house with a snowy owl on her arm, the owl conducting herself with the dignity of a creature who had always known she deserved better than a garage and was simply gratified that someone had finally noticed. The owl saw Harry and made a sound that was not quite a screech and not quite a coo and landed on his shoulder with the firm purposefulness of a statement being made. Harry's face changed. It was the first time it changed, really changed, the first crack in the careful flatness he'd been wearing since Amelia opened his door. He lifted his hand and let the owl press her head into it, and something in the set of his jaw went from rigid to just tired, and Amelia decided that the operational debrief could wait, and the formal protocols could wait, and the 17-point intake procedure that the DMLE handbook technically required could wait, because this child needed a moment before any of that. She gave him one. "Then, there's a safe house in Edinburgh. It's warded, it's clean, and it has a kitchen with food in it." She watched him absorb this. "We also need to talk. Quite a lot, actually." "About what?" He'd put the careful face back on, but it wasn't quite as tight as before. "About why you're worth 11 separate formal complaints filed against the Dursley household by 4 different ministry officials over the past decade," she said, watching his face, "all of which were suppressed before reaching my desk." She started walking again. "About what suppressed means in that context. About who had the clearance to do it." Harry fell into step beside her. "And," she added, because she'd decided on the walk-up that she was not going to manage him, not going to drip-feed him, not going to do to him what had already been done to him for 11 years, "about your parents' will." That got a reaction. Not a big one, not the explosion you might expect from a boy who'd grown up with nothing and was hearing this for the first time. Just a stillness, a sudden and complete stillness, the kind that happened when information landed somewhere important. "I didn't know they had one," he said. "They did," said Amelia. "It's one of the things we need to talk about." They walked through the gate of number 4, Privet Drive, and as they cleared the property boundary, Harry Potter did something that Amelia would think about later. in quieter moments, as one of the more telling things she'd witnessed in a long career, he didn't look back. The Edinburgh safe house was a Georgian terrace on a quiet street that the Fidelius charm had protected since 1984. Inside, it was furnished in the comfortable, slightly mismatched style of a place that had been added to by many hands over many years: good armchairs, shelves of books, a kitchen table big enough to seat 12 that had probably seated 12 on a number of occasions that were better not documented. Amelia sent 7 of the 9 Aurors back to the ministry with instructions and a sealed report for the Wisengamot Judicial Office. She kept Kingsley and Tonks. Kingsley because she trusted him absolutely, and Tonks because Harry had looked at her with something approaching relief when she'd brought him his owl, and Amelia was experienced enough to know when a child needed someone in the room who wasn't frightening. Harry ate a plate of scrambled eggs and toast with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned not to be precious about food, and Amelia let him finish before she opened the folder on the table. "I want to start," she said, "by telling you what I know. Not what I suspect, not what I'm theorizing. What I can prove." She folded her hands on the folder. "Then I'd like to hear anything you want to tell me. And then I'll tell you what we're going to do. Does that work?" Harry pushed the plate to the side and looked at her with those measuring eyes. "Sure." Amelia opened the folder. "Your parents, James and Lily Potter, filed a will with the Department of Magical Records on October 29, 1981. 2 days before they died." She watched his face. "In that will, they named Sirius Black as your primary guardian. Frank and Alice Longbottom as secondary. Arthur and Molly Weasley as tertiary. They specifically, explicitly, legally excluded your aunt and uncle from any guardianship consideration." The silence in the kitchen had a particular quality. "Dumbledore placed you with the Dursleys," Harry said. "Yes. That wasn't legal." "No," said Amelia. "It was not." She turned a page. "What I am going to tell you next is something that I need you to hear fully, because it has implications beyond your guardianship." She looked up. "Before they died, your parents were the head and co-head of 2 of the wizarding world's oldest families, House Potter and House Evans. Your father was Lord Potter by blood succession. Your mother was Lady Evans by magical lineage, which is a rarer form of hereditary succession but no less valid. When they died, both titles and all associated holdings, vaults, properties, and Wisengamot seats, passed directly to you." Harry hadn't moved. "2 titles," Amelia said. "But that's not where it stops." She turned another page, and the stack of parchment beneath it was thick enough that Harry looked at it and something shifted in his expression. "Your father, as Lord Potter, held 9 sealed alliance seats. These are Wisengamot seats granted through formal treaty agreements made by the Potter line over the past 6 centuries, seats that cannot be voted with but also cannot be voted away, and that carry with them specific legal rights, vault access, and property interests." She paused. "All 9 are listed here as having been administered by the Office of the Chief Warlock since November 1981. The Office of the Chief Warlock, Harry knew from his first year at Hogwarts, was Albus Dumbledore's office. "He's been using them," Harry said. "Not a question. Voting with some. Leaving others dormant. There are 3 properties in the Potter estate, a house in Wales, a cottage in the Highlands, and a property in Godric's Hollow, which were deeded in your mother's name and should have passed to you under her will. All 3 were transferred to a private trust administered by the Chief Warlock's office 6 weeks after your parents' deaths." Harry reached out and put his hand flat on the table, and Amelia watched him make a conscious, deliberate choice to be still. 11, he said. 2 from my parents, 9 alliance seats. Yes. How long have you known this? And this was the moment Amelia had been preparing for since she'd started assembling this file, because the honest answer was one that didn't reflect well on her. "I found the will discrepancy 4 months ago," she said. "The vault access irregularities 2 months ago. The property transfers last month." She held his gaze. I spent that time building a case that couldn't be dismantled before I used it. I am not telling you that to excuse the timeline. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that everything I've done in the last 4 months has been to make sure that when I came through your door, I came through it with something that couldn't be taken away. Harry looked at her for a long time. Why? He said. Not skeptically. Genuinely asking. Because your parents were good people, Amelia said. And because Susan, my niece, is your age, and I know what her life looks like, and then I read the welfare reports from Privet Drive and I couldn't sleep. She said it simply, without drama, because drama would make it about her. And because I swore an oath when I took this job, and I have spent 11 years not realizing what that oath was failing to protect. Kingsley poured 2 cups of tea without being asked and set them on the table and went back to standing against the wall like a particularly large and reliable piece of furniture. Harry wrapped his hands around the cup. He didn't drink it. He was thinking, visibly, and Amelia recognized the look, the rapid, careful processing of someone who was used to having to work out the angles of everything themselves because there was nobody to do it for them. What happens now? He asked. Gringotts, first. Tomorrow morning. You need to undergo the formal inheritance ritual. It's the only way to have the titles legally recognized and put your name on the vaults. She turned to the last page of the folder. I'll be there. So will a legal representative from the DMLE and a Gringotts inheritance specialist. It'll take most of the morning. And the Wiesengemot? The seats? Amelia raised an eyebrow just slightly, because most 11-year-olds would have asked about the money first. The Wiesengemot will follow from Gringotts. The goblin recognition is the primary legal mechanism. Once the goblins acknowledge the inheritance, the Wiesengemot seats activate automatically under the Family Magic Preservation Act of 1693. Dumbledore will try to stop it. He will try, said Amelia. There are things I've done to make that difficult. She said it with the calm certainty of someone who had already played out the board several moves deep. He has influence, and he has allies, and he has 17 years of institutional authority. What he does not have is a legal leg to stand on, because the will, the vault records, and the property transfers are documented and logged with 3 independent offices, and this morning's arrest of your aunt and uncle is going to be on the front page of the Prophet before he's had his breakfast. Something moved at the corner of Harry's mouth. Not quite a smile. Something in the vicinity of one. You already sent it? The press release went out at 5:45 a.m., said Amelia. Before we knocked. Tonks, from across the room, made a small sound that might have been a suppressed noise of appreciation. Harry picked up the tea and drank it. He set the cup down. He looked at the folder for a moment, at the stack of evidence, at his own name written across the top in Amelia's neat, decisive hand, and then he looked up. Can I read it? He asked. All of it. It's yours, said Amelia, and pushed it across the table. He read for 3 hours. Amelia worked at the other end of the table. Kingsley and Tonks took rotations outside. Hedwig had found a windowsill and was conducting a rigorous examination of the Edinburgh morning with the air of someone deciding whether to approve. Harry read without asking questions, which Amelia found interesting. He read the way you read something you're committing to memory, going back occasionally, holding pages up to the light when the ink was faint, making no notes because he didn't seem to need them. He was on his 3rd pass of the property transfer documents when he found something that made him stop. The Peveril title, he said. Amelia looked up. Yes. It's listed in the Potter Vault inventory. It's not one of the 9 Alliance seats. It's separate. He turned the page toward her, though she knew what was on it. What is the Peveril title? The Peverils were an ancient and noble house, Amelia said carefully. One of the oldest. They died out in the direct male line approximately 4 centuries ago. Their title and vault lapsed into dormancy. She paused. The Potter line are their descendants through the female line. Your grandfather discovered this in 1952 and filed the appropriate paperwork, but the title remained dormant because no Lord Potter ever formally claimed it. It would have been claimed by your father at his coming of age, had he not. She stopped. Had circumstances been different. Harry looked at the document. So it's mine too. If you claim it at Gringotts, yes. That's 12, he said. Yes, said Amelia. It is. He nodded once, as if this were simply information to be integrated, and went back to reading. Amelia looked at him for a moment, this thin, too quiet boy in a second-hand jumper and cracked glasses, reading the legal architecture of his own stolen life with the focused attention of someone who intended to build something with it, and she thought about what she'd said to her assistant last week, when she was putting the case together. I don't know what he'll be when he's grown. But I know what they made him into, and I know they miscalculated. She turned back to her own papers. Around noon, Tonks came in and made sandwiches. She put a plate in front of Harry without ceremony and he ate without looking up from the folder, which made Tonks grin at Amelia behind his back with an expression that said, "I like this kid." "Can I ask you something?" Harry said, still looking at the folder. "Yes," said Amelia. "The original welfare complaints. The ones that were suppressed. Who filed them?" Amelia set down her quill. This was a question she'd prepared for, but hearing it was still different from anticipating it. "A Hogwarts professor in 1988, after reviewing your squib registration paperwork, they noted irregularities in the home assessment. A ministry social welfare officer in 1989 during a routine check. A Hogwarts administrator in 1990. She paused. And Arabella Figg, 3 times, beginning in 1983. "Mrs. Figg," Harry said quietly. "She lives on Wisteria Walk. She's a squib. She was placed there to watch you." Amelia chose her words. "She filed complaints when she felt your situation had deteriorated past what she'd been told to expect. Those complaints were redirected through the Chief Warlock's office." Harry put the folder down for the first time in 3 hours. He looked at the wall for a moment with an expression that was entirely contained, not blank, but self-contained, like something being held at a precise temperature. Then he said, "He told her to watch me." "Yes. And when she said it was getting bad, he told her it was necessary." The silence that followed was not Harry processing this for the first time. It was Harry confirming something he had already more or less known, and finding that the confirmation felt exactly as awful as he'd expected it to. "The blood wards," Harry said. "He always said the blood wards kept me safe. That I needed to be there." "The blood wards on Privet Drive were real," Amelia said. "They did provide a degree of protection. Whether that protection required you to live in those specific conditions is a question that several experts will be answering under oath in the coming months." Harry picked up the folder again. "Okay," he said. "What time do we leave for Gringotts tomorrow?" 6 a.m., said Amelia. "I want to be there before the morning rush." He nodded, turned a page, and kept reading. That evening, Amelia found him sitting on the window seat in the upstairs study with Hedwig on his knee and a copy of the Daily Prophet folded in half on the cushion beside him. He'd found it on the side table. She hadn't hidden it, hadn't thought to, which she reflected had been perhaps underestimating him. The headline was large enough to read from across the room. "Dursleys arrested, DMLE opens investigation into boy Who-lived's decade at Privet Drive." Beneath it, in smaller type, "Chief Warlock unavailable for comment." "He'll be furious," Harry said, not looking up from the owl. "Almost certainly," Amelia agreed. "He'll try to reach me. He'll find that difficult. This property has specific interdictions on communication charms originating from Hogwarts or the Wisengamot chamber." She leaned against the door frame. "He doesn't know where you are. He'll figure it out. He's not stupid." "No," said Amelia. "He's not. But smart men make different mistakes than stupid men, and Albus Dumbledore has spent 50 years being the most capable person in every room he's entered." She paused. He's going to be quite wrong about what kind of problem you are. Harry stroked Hedwig's feathers. The owl blinked with enormous golden eyes, the blink of a creature who was deeply satisfied with current circumstances. The letter, Harry said. The one from my dad. You said it was in the will. Attached to it. Yes. Can I have it tonight? Amelia had it in her bag, because of course she did. She'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, aware that it belonged to him and increasingly aware that the act of giving it to him would be an irreversible one. A door that once opened became a completely different kind of hallway. She went and got it. It was a simple envelope, sealed with Potter family wax, the flying stag crest, old and formal, the wax slightly cracked at one edge from time. She set it on the window seat next to him. He didn't pick it up immediately. He just looked at it for a while. Then he said, "Thank you. For all of this. For coming. You don't need to thank me." "I know," he said. "I'm doing it anyway." Amelia nodded once and left him to it. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for exactly 10 seconds, which was the amount of time she permitted herself, and then she went back downstairs to finish her work. From behind the closed door of the study, in the quiet house in Edinburgh, with the city sounds filtering in through the old glass and Hedwig dozing on her perch, Harry Potter opened the letter from his father. He read it through once, fast, the way you read something you're afraid will be taken away. Then he read it again slowly. Then he sat for a long time with it folded in his lap and his hand pressed flat against his sternum, where something was happening that wasn't sadness, exactly. Sadness would have been simpler, more familiar. This was something else, something that had the shape of recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting for this specific weight in his hands since before he had the language to know he was waiting. The letter said, among other things, between the lines of the formal legal language of the addendum and the warmer, rougher prose of the personal section, that James Potter had known something might happen to him. That he'd made arrangements. That he'd trusted the right people, named the right names, and left the right documents, and that if Harry was reading this, then something had gone wrong with those arrangements, but not irreparably wrong, because James Potter had the optimism of a man who'd played Quidditch and won, and he signed off with the unshakable confidence of someone who believed his son would figure it out. "You're a Potter," the letter said, near the end. "We are inconveniently difficult to finish." Harry refolded it. Put it in the breast pocket of his jumper, against his chest. He looked out at Edinburgh going dark, at the lights coming on in the windows of ordinary houses where ordinary people were making dinner and arguing over the television and not thinking at all about ancient houses and stolen titles and the specific texture of a world that had decided who you were before you had a say in it. Tomorrow, he thought. Gringotts tomorrow. He was not afraid of it. He found, sitting there in the window with his father's letter against his heart and his owl asleep behind him and 9 Aurors worth of legal firepower standing between him and anyone who wanted to put him back in that small room with the cat flap in the door, he found that afraid was not the thing he was. What he was ready. Chapter 2, The Weight of Houses. Gringotts opened its doors at precisely 7 a.m., and Amelia had them there at 6:53. The leaky cauldron was quiet at that hour, Tom behind the bar wiping glasses with the automatic persistence of someone who'd been doing it so long it had become a kind of meditation, 2 witches in traveling cloaks nursing coffees at the far end. Nobody paid much attention to the small group moving through toward the back entrance, which was partly by design. Amelia had dressed plainly, no DMLE robes, no badge on display. Kingsley wore a muggle suit. Tonks had done something with her appearance that landed in the comfortable middle ground of completely forgettable, which was a specific skill that not everyone with metamorphmagus ability bothered to develop. Harry wore the same clothes as yesterday because they were the only ones he had. He'd noticed this himself, standing in the safe house kitchen at 5:30 with a piece of toast in one hand, and had said nothing about it, which Amelia found more pointed than any complaint would have been. She'd sent Tonks out at dawn with a list and a coin pouch, and Tonks had come back with jeans, 2 jumpers, and a pair of trainers that actually fit, and Harry had accepted them with a brief, genuine thanks that had absolutely none of the overwrought gratitude of someone performing appreciation and all of the relief of someone who'd needed the thing and was glad to have it. He wore the green jumper. It was a good color on him, though he didn't seem to have noticed this. They went through the back wall of the leaky cauldron and into Diagon Alley, and the alley in the early morning was a different creature than the alley at midday, quieter, stripped of its performative bustle, the shopkeepers setting out their displays with the unhurried deliberateness of people who had hours before the crowds arrived. Harry looked at all of it the way he'd looked at Edinburgh the night before, taking it in, cataloguing it, not letting himself be distracted by it. The goblins at the front entrance of Gringotts were already watching them by the time they reached the marble steps. Not the idle watching of bored sentries. The focused, evaluative attention of creatures who had been doing a very specific form of mathematics since before the group came through the brick archway, and who had arrived at an answer that made them, not straighten, exactly, because goblins didn't straighten, but something adjacent to it. A reorientation. A sharpening. "Amelia Bones," said the goblin on the left. "Director Ragnarok was informed of your arrival." "Good," said Amelia. "We have a 9 o'clock appointment for an inheritance ritual." "The director has moved your appointment to 7 a.m., said the goblin. He looked at Harry, and there was something in the look that Harry filed away. He has been expecting this visit for some time. They were escorted inside without the usual wait. Director Ragnarok's office was not the office of someone who considered decoration a priority. It was the office of someone who considered information a priority. Every wall was shelved, every shelf was full, the desk was buried under organized stacks of parchment that communicated busyness of a very purposeful kind. Ragnarok himself was old, even by goblin standards, with the dense, compressed quality of great age in a creature that had never been large to begin with. He sat behind the desk and looked at Harry Potter with eyes the color of old bronze. "Sit," he said. They sat. Ragnarok looked at the folder Amelia placed on his desk, then set it aside without opening it. "I don't need that," he said. "Gringotts has its own records." He folded his hands. "What I need is to confirm that the boy is here of his own volition and is prepared to undergo the full inheritance ritual." "I am," said Harry. Ragnarok looked at him directly. "You understand what the ritual entails?" "Some of it." Amelia explained the basics. "The basics," Ragnarok said, with a tone that suggested the basics were to the full picture what a doorstep was to a cathedral, are as follows. The ritual uses a drop of your blood on enchanted parchment. Every inheritance you hold, every title, every vault, every property, every sealed covenant or alliance, will be revealed. Things you expected. Things you did not." He paused. "Things others have been hoping would remain hidden." He said this without looking at Amelia, but with the intonation of someone who was precisely aware of where they were not looking. It cannot be stopped partway through. It cannot be modified or filtered. It is complete, or it does not happen. "I understand," Harry said. "You are 11 years old," said Ragnarok, and it was not condescending, it was documentary. A fact being placed on the table. "Yes," said Harry. "And I've been 11 years old in a room with a cat flap in the door for the last 10 years, so I'd like to know what I actually own." He said it without heat, without self-pity, in the same flat declarative register he'd used with Amelia the morning before. "I understand the ritual. I want to do it." Ragnarok looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded once, with the finite weight of a judge handing down a ruling, and stood up. "Come," he said. "The ritual room is prepared." The ritual room was 3 levels below ground, which Harry gathered from the cart ride, a different cart than the one that took customers to the vaults, faster, with a goblin driver who navigated the stone tunnels with the casual expertise of someone who could do it blind. Kingsley and Tonks waited upstairs. Amelia and the DMLE legal representative, a quiet, thin-featured witch named Clearwater who said almost nothing and wrote almost everything down, followed Harry and Ragnarok. The room itself was circular, cut from raw stone, lit by torches in iron brackets that burned a steady blue-white. In the center was a stone table, plain and old in the way that things are old when they predate the concept of age, with a shallow depression in the surface no larger than a dinner plate. Next to it, a roll of parchment the length of Harry's arm, held flat at the edges by two small iron weights. A second goblin was already in the room, younger than Ragnarok, introduced as Griphook, though not warmly, the way you introduce an instrument rather than a colleague. Griphook held a silver lancet. "Your right hand," said Ragnarok. Harry held it out. Griphook took it with both hands, positioned the lancet with the care of someone for whom precision was self-respect, and drew a shallow cut across the pad of Harry's index finger. It hurt the way a paper cut hurt, sharp, small, out of proportion to its size. Harry held his finger over the depression in the stone table. A drop of blood fell. Then another. The parchment came alive. Not immediately, there was a moment where nothing happened, the held breath of a mechanism engaging, and then the ink began to flow from the top of the parchment as though being written by a very fast, very deliberate invisible hand. Harry watched it. The room was silent except for the soft scratch of Clearwater's quill and the faint sound of the torches. The parchment wrote his name first, in letters larger than what followed, Harry James Potter, and then beneath it, in 2 columns, the inheritance began to unspool. The first dozen lines were expected. Potter. Evans. The 9 alliance seats, each named, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. Harry's head came up sharply at those, and 5 others, older names, House Pendragon, House Emrys, House Gaunt, House Peverell, House Ignotus. Then the vaults, numbered and lettered, with estimated values in shorthand that Ragnarok would explain later. Then the properties, 7 of them, one of which was Godric's Hollow listed as partially destroyed, remains held in estate. Then the parchment kept going. Harry stared. "What is," he started. "Wait," said Ragnarok. The ink was slowing now, becoming more deliberate, as though the parchment was working harder. 3 more lines appeared, each with a small symbol beside it that Harry didn't recognize, a triangular mark, like a sail. "Those," said Ragnarok, "are the Deathly Hallow inheritance lines. They are not houses. They are object claims. One of them is currently in active use by another party." He said the last part the way you say something that you have been waiting a long time to say to the correct person. "We will discuss those separately." "And those?" Harry pointed to the final section of the parchment, where 4 more names had appeared beneath a thin line that seemed to separate them from everything above. Ragnarok read them. Bones. Longbottom. McKinnon. Pruitt. He looked up. "These are not inheritance lines. These are legacy guardian titles. They were registered by your father in the Potter Family Trust, naming specific houses as magical kin to the Potter line in the event of his death and the minority of his heir." He paused. "They grant those houses specific rights of protection and advocacy over you, the heir, until you reach majority. They should have been activated in November 1981. "They weren't," said Amelia. Her voice was entirely controlled, which meant she was furious. "They were not," Ragnarok agreed. "They have been dormant. They are active now." He looked at Harry. "You are, to put it in terms you may find accessible, owed 11 years of advocacy from 3 families who did not know they were owed to you, and who may find this information." He paused again. "Significant." Amelia sat down in the chair behind her. She looked, briefly, like someone who has done the mathematics and found the number larger than expected. "Frank and Alice Longbottom," she said. "If they had been activated as magical guardians, they would have had both the right and the legal obligation to demand independent oversight of your placement," Ragnarok said to Harry. "An oversight that would have superseded the Chief Warlock's administrative authority." He unrolled the bottom portion of the parchment. "Had those titles been activated, you would not have gone to Privet Drive." The room was quiet for a moment. "Can I see the full list?" Harry asked. Ragnock handed him the parchment. Harry read it from top to bottom, slowly, the way he'd read the DMLE folder the day before. Nobody rushed him. Amelia was doing something complicated with her expression. Clearwater had filled 2 pages of notes. Ragnock stood with his hands folded and the patience of a creature who measured time in centuries. Harry got to the bottom of the parchment. He looked up. Gryffindor, he said. Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. He kept his voice flat, but the effort was visible, just barely. Those are Hogwarts founder lines. Yes, said Ragnock. I own Hogwarts. You are the last blood heir of all 4 founding families through various convergent lines, Ragnock said. The school itself is held in an educational trust that predates modern Wisengamot law and cannot be individually owned. However, the founder seats, which carry with them significant governance rights over the Board of Governors, curriculum authority, and staff appointments, are yours. He allowed a pause. The current headmaster of Hogwarts holds those seats under administrative appointment. Harry put the parchment on the table. Dumbledore, he said. Yes, said Ragnock, and he said it with the satisfaction of a goblin who had been waiting 11 years to say it to the right person. The vault tour took 2 more hours. Ragnock led them personally, which Harry gathered was unusual enough that even Clearwater looked up from her notes when the director produced the master key. They went vault by vault, not physically, there were too many, but through Ragnock's ledgers, the old ones, the handwritten ones that predated the Ministry's record-keeping systems by 3 centuries and that bore no cross-references to anything outside Gringotts walls. Potter Vault first. It was the size of a small house and it was not empty, it was, in fact, astoundingly full, because while Dumbledore had rerouted the incoming rents and royalties and interest on certain holdings, he had not been able to access the vault itself without Harry's key, and so 11 years of uninvested gold had simply been sitting there, accumulating with goblin interest rates that were, Ragnock noted with a professionally neutral expression, quite favorable. Harry stood in the door of the vault and looked at it. How much? He asked. Ragnock told him. Harry was quiet for a moment. In Muggle terms. Ragnock converted the figure with the ease of someone who did it regularly. He said the number. Even Amelia made a small sound. Right, said Harry, and moved on. The Alliance vaults were smaller individually but numerous, and several held things more interesting than gold, documents, primarily, ancient contracts and correspondence and sealed letters that Ragnock indicated would require Harry's formal claim signature before anyone could even catalogue them. There was a vault that held only objects, sealed under preservation charms, including a cloak that the inventory listed as Peveril, Deathly Hallow, first that Harry looked at for 10 seconds and then asked Ragnock to reseal. Not today, he said. I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I touch it. Ragnock looked at him with something that might have been, on a different face, a look of approval. The gaunt vault was the strangest. It was small, nearly empty, and what was there was dark in the specific way that things are dark when they've been in proximity to very bad magic for a very long time. Ragnock indicated that it could be assessed and cleared by Gringotts specialists, and Harry agreed to this immediately, which Ragnock noted. Most heirs, the director said as they made their way back up in the cart, upon discovering what you have discovered today, spend a significant portion of the meeting asking how quickly they can access specific funds or items. He looked at Harry sidelong. You have not asked this. There's no point in having things you don't know how to use yet, Harry said. Ragnock made a sound in his throat. It wasn't agreement, precisely, but it was something in that direction. Back in Ragnock's office, the formal documentation took another hour. Harry signed his name with a self-inking quill that left a perfect copy in the Gringotts ledger and a second copy in the Potter family records, and with each signature, something happened that wasn't entirely physical, a warmth, a settling, a sense of pieces engaging with each other in ways that had been waiting 11 years for permission. By the time he'd signed the last page, He felt different in a way that was difficult to articulate and that he suspected had nothing to do with anything dramatic and everything to do with the simple, radical fact of being recognized. Clearwater handed Ragnok the DMLE's official copy of the will. Ragnok signed the acknowledgement. The inheritance was legally recognized. "There is one more thing," said Ragnok, when the paperwork was done. He reached into his desk drawer and produced a signet ring, solid gold, old, with the Potter stag crest raised on the face of it. He set it on the desk. The head of house ring. It was held in custody pending heir identification. He looked at Harry. "You are the heir. Identified." Harry picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it over in his fingers and then put it on, the ring finger of his right hand, and it resized itself with the decisive snap of something that had been waiting for this specific finger for a very long time. Then Ragnok produced a second ring, older, plainer, a narrow band with a symbol that Harry now recognized as the Peveril sigil. Then a third, the Evans lily on a silver band. He lined them up on the desk and Harry put them on, the warmth of each one settling against his skin, and by the time the third was in place, Amelia was looking at him with an expression that she'd been keeping carefully professional for the past 3 hours and that was, just slightly, slipping. "There are 11 more signet rings," said Ragnok. "Given the number of houses and the associated alliance seats, we have taken the liberty of commissioning a ring that incorporates all alliance seals rather than requiring you to wear 11 individual bands." He produced this last ring from a velvet box, a wider band, gold, with tiny carved seals arranged in a ring around its circumference. "This is unusual," Ragnok acknowledged. "But then, so is your situation." Harry put it on his left hand. He looked down at his hands. 4 rings. The warmth had settled from warmth into something more structural, something that felt less like sensation and more like standing on ground that was, finally, not moving. "What happens now?" he asked. "Legally. With the Wisengamot seats. The seats will activate at midnight tonight," said Ragnok. "That is Gringotts' formal notification to the Wisengamot family magic registry. You will receive an official owl from the ministry within 24 hours confirming your recognition as lord of the relevant houses." He paused. "The current occupant of those seats will simultaneously receive notice of their cessation of rights." "Dumbledore will get a letter tonight," Harry said. "He will," said Ragnok. "Several, in fact." "Good," said Harry simply. They emerged from Gringotts at 11:15 into a Diagon alley that had woken up properly. The crowds were out, the shops were busy, the air smelled like pasties from the bakery on the corner and something sulphurous from the apothecary 2 doors down. The morning sun was bright and slightly warm in the specific English way that suggested it was doing its best but making no promises. Kingsley and Tonks fell into step on either side of them as they came down the marble steps. "How'd it go?" Tonks asked. "Well," said Amelia, which was the understatement of the decade. Harry was looking at the alley around him with a different quality of attention than he'd had 3 hours ago. Not a dramatic difference, he was too contained for drama. But Amelia noticed it. He was looking at it the way you look at a place you've decided has something to do with you. "I want robes," he said. Tonks blinked. "Sorry? I need robes. For the Wisengamot, eventually. And for, generally." He looked at his hands, the 4 rings, the green jumper. "I should look like what I am." Amelia considered whether this was the moment to point out that what he was, officially, would take days to process through the various ministry registries and he wouldn't technically be required to appear before the Wisengamot until formally summoned. She looked at his face and decided not to point this out. "Madame Malkin's," she said. "Come on." Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions was mercifully not too busy at 11:15 on a Tuesday. The small woman behind the counter looked up when they came in and started the routine greeting of someone who'd greeted 1,000 customers and would greet 1,000 more, and then she saw Amelia's face and she saw Harry's hands and she put the measuring tape down. Lord Potter, she said. The words hit the air in the shop and sat there. It was the first time anyone had called him that. Not the boy who lived, not Harry, not the Dursleys' pointed non-acknowledgement. Lord Potter. Like it was his name. Like it was the right name. Harry looked at Madame Malkin for a moment. Just Harry is fine, he said. But I need dress robes and 3 sets of general robes, and I'd like them today if that's possible. It was possible. It was made possible very quickly. While Malkin's assistants took measurements, Tonks wandered to the front window and then came back with the expression she wore when she had something to report and wasn't sure of the reception. Profits updated its morning edition, she said quietly, showing Amelia the paper. The headline had changed from this morning's version. It now read, Boy WHO lived found in Muggle home, DMLE opens full review, Dumbledore refuses comment. Below the fold, in smaller type, sources close to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement suggest Gringotts visit this morning. Inheritance ritual rumored. More to follow. How do they even, Tonks started. Tom, said Amelia flatly. Or one of the Gringotts runners. It doesn't matter. It's going to be everywhere by afternoon. She looked at Harry, who was standing on the fitting platform with a faint expression of someone who had not previously been measured for anything by anyone. He needs to be ready. He seems like he's been ready for a while, said Kingsley quietly. Amelia tucked the paper away. Kingsley wasn't wrong. Harry caught Amelia's eye across the shop. I saw the paper, he said. He'd clearly seen Tonks come back with it. We'll need to think about a public statement, Amelia said. No statement. Not yet. He held his arms out so an assistant could measure his wingspan, and his voice was the same as always, flat, decisive, undramatic. I want the Wisengamot seats to activate first. I want to be in a position that nobody can argue with before I start saying things publicly. Amelia studied him. That's a very specific instinct. If I talk before the seats are activated, it's just a story about a kid who found out some things, Harry said. If I talk after, it's a sitting lord of 11 houses who has things to say. He met her eyes. Different category of problem. Tonks looked at Kingsley. Kingsley looked at the ceiling with an expression of controlled appreciation. Where did you learn that? Amelia asked. Harry thought about it. The Dursleys, he said. Vernon used to say that you should never complain about the neighbors until you knew which of them was friendly with the landlord. A pause. He didn't think I was listening. They were back at the safe house by 2 o'clock. The new robes were in a box. Hedwig had rearranged the windowsill to her satisfaction and was asleep. Harry ate a proper lunch, the first one, Amelia thought, that she had seen him eat without the faint background anxiety of someone who'd learned that food was not reliable, and then he went to the study and came back with a specific look that meant he'd been thinking. The Bones house, he said, sitting down across from her at the kitchen table. It's on my parchment. As a legacy guardian title. He had the folder open in front of him. That's your family. Amelia set her tea down. Yes. Your niece, Susan. The one you mentioned. Yes. And the Longbottoms. His voice changed slightly on the name, not soft, but careful. Frank and Alice Longbottom. There, I know what happened to them. Bellatrix Lestrange. Yes, said Amelia. Their son Neville is your age. He's in your year at Hogwarts. Harry was quiet for a moment. If the Legacy Guardian title activates, it has activated, said Amelia. It activated when the inheritance was recognized. Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother, should be receiving her notification from Gringotts as we speak. She's going to have questions. She's going to have many questions, and then she's going to want to meet you, and then she's going to take approximately 48 hours to process the legal implications and arrive at a state of formidable and organized fury. Amelia said this with the familiarity of someone who knew Augusta Longbottom well enough to have planned around her personality. She'll be useful. And your family, Harry said. Bones. Susan's father, my brother Edgar, was killed in the war, Amelia said. His wife with him. Susan lives with me. She said it cleanly, without invitation for elaboration, and Harry accepted this with a nod that said he'd heard both the fact and the subtext. Does Susan know about the Legacy Guardian connection? Not yet. Harry drummed his fingers once on the table, a single, light tap. She should know. Before it becomes official. Before she reads it in the Prophet. He looked up. People shouldn't have to find out things about their family from a newspaper. Amelia looked at him. There was something in that sentence that clearly hadn't been intended to be personal, and equally clearly was, and Harry knew it, and was choosing to say it anyway rather than pretend the parallel wasn't there. I'll talk to her this evening, Amelia said. Thank you. He turned back to the folder. Then, the McKinnon title. There's no one left? Amelia shook her head. Marlene McKinnon was killed in the war. Her whole family. The title will vest in you as the Potter heir through the Legacy Guardian mechanism until a legitimate McKinnon heir is identified, which, given what happened to the family, is unlikely. She paused. The Pruitt name is different. The Pruitts had 2 sons. Fabian and Gideon, both killed. But their sister, Molly Weasley. She has children. The title may transfer through her line. The Weasleys, Harry said. He'd met them briefly at King's Cross the year before, the large red-headed family with the father who'd wanted to know about the Muggle ticket barrier. They're also in the will. As tertiary guardians. Yes. Arthur and Molly Weasley. Harry turned this over. They knew? They may not have known they were named in the will. The will was sealed immediately after the deaths and the contents were managed. The word landed with its full weight. I intend to speak to Arthur Weasley as well. Harry looked at the list of names in the folder: Bones, Longbottom, McKinnon, Pruitt, Weasley. A constellation of people who had been orbiting a child they'd never been allowed to know. I want to meet them, he said. All of them. Not officially, not formally, not with robes and titles. He looked up. Before all of that. I want to meet them as a person first. That can be arranged, Amelia said. Give me a few days. I have a few days, Harry said, and there was something dry in it, the faintest edge of irony about having, quite suddenly, time that was his own. That night, alone in the study again, Harry spread the inheritance parchment on the desk under the lamplight and read it from beginning to end one more time. 11 houses. 12 titles if you counted the Peveril separately from the Alliance seats. 3 properties in active dispute. 9 dormant Wisengamot seats about to become suddenly very undormant. A vault full of gold that had been sitting untouched since before he could walk. And a cloak in a sealed vault 3 levels below Diagon Alley that he wasn't ready to think about yet. He pressed the parchment flat with his palm and looked at the names. The thing that kept coming back to him, the thing he'd been pushing to the side all day because it would have to wait, was Dumbledore. Not rage, specifically, though something in that direction existed and he wasn't going to pretend it didn't. What kept coming back was simpler and more uncomfortable than rage. It was the question of the story Dumbledore had told himself. The man wasn't a cartoon. Amelia had acknowledged that. Harry had known it instinctively since before he had the vocabulary for it. There was a difference between someone who did something wrong because they were cruel and someone who did something wrong because they were certain they were right, and the difference mattered enormously when you were thinking about what came next. Dumbledore had looked at the will, at the names of the people James and Lily had trusted, and had decided, for reasons Harry didn't fully know yet, that he knew better. That his arrangement was safer. That the blood wards on Privet Drive were more important than the people named in a dead couple's will. He'd decided that, and then he'd spent 10 years maintaining it, and now the parchment on Harry's desk was the receipt for the cost. Harry folded the parchment carefully and put it in the folder with his father's letter. There would be a confrontation. He knew that with the certainty of whether it was coming, and the only variable was when and where and what he would be holding when it arrived. He was not afraid of it. He was also not, he acknowledged to himself in the lamplight of the Edinburgh study, in a hurry for it. Because hurrying would make it about anger, and anger was the instrument of people who had nothing else. He had something else now. He had 11 houses, 12 titles, 4 rings, and a legal representative from the DMLE whose notes already filled 4 parchment pages. He had, for the first time in his life, options. He turned off the lamp and went to bed, and Hedwig settled on the headboard and clicked her beak once, softly, like punctuation, and Harry lay in the dark of a room that had a door that nobody had put locks on and thought about tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Wizengamot seats would activate. Tomorrow, Albus Dumbledore would get his letters. He slept well. Chapter 3, The Wizengamot remembers the letters arrived at midnight exactly. Harry didn't see them go out, he was asleep, and sleeping well, which was still new enough to be remarkable. But Ragnarok had told him they would be sent at midnight, and Gringotts was, above all things, punctual. 11 separate notifications, dispatched by 11 separate Gringotts owls to 11 separate addresses across Britain, each one sealed with the bank's official crest and written in the particular legal language that meant the contents were binding and recorded and could not be subsequently claimed to have been unclear. Dumbledore's copy arrived at Hogwarts at 12:03 a.m., because Hogwarts was slightly further from Gringotts than the other addresses and the owl had faced a headwind over the Highlands. Harry found out later that Dumbledore had been awake when it arrived. That he'd been sitting at his desk in the circular office, the one with the sleeping portraits and the spinning instruments, and that he'd read the letter 3 times before setting it down. That he'd then sat very still for a long time. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus, who had excellent hearing and even better gossiping instincts, relayed this to Augusta Longbottom several weeks later, who relayed it to Amelia, who mentioned it to Harry in the way she mentioned things she thought he should know but wouldn't push. What Harry knew for certain was that by 7 a.m., when he came downstairs for breakfast, Amelia was already at the kitchen table with 3 owls' worth of correspondence sorted into piles and an expression that suggested the piles were interesting. Lucius Malfoy, she said, without preamble, has already filed a motion to delay recognition proceedings. Harry poured himself tea. On what grounds? He's claiming procedural irregularities in the inheritance ritual. Arguing that a minor cannot activate dormant alliance seats without a designated magical guardian present. She turned the parchment to show him. It's clever. The law he's citing is real, it just doesn't apply in this case, because the alliance seats aren't being activated, they're being restored, which is a different mechanism entirely. Does he know that? Lucius Malfoy absolutely knows that, said Amelia. He's not trying to win the motion. He's trying to create enough procedural noise to delay the Wizengamot notification by 48 hours, during which time he'll be working every contact he has to arrange a response. Harry sat down. So he's buying time. Badly, said Tonks from the doorway, eating toast with the relaxed energy of someone who'd had a good night's sleep and found other people's crises bracing. Clearwater already filed the counter. Ragnarok's office confirmed the precedent at about 2 in the morning. The motion's going to be rejected before noon. So the seats activate on schedule, Harry said. The seats activated at midnight, Amelia said. The notification was Gringotts informing the Wizengamot of what had already happened. Malfoy's motion is technically trying to unring a bell. She set the parchment down. It won't work. But it tells us something. He's scared, Harry said. He's being careful, which in Lucius Malfoy's case is functionally identical. Amelia reached for the second pile of letters. Augusta Longbottom wants to meet you. This morning, if possible. The tone is, she considered. Insistent. She's Neville's grandmother. She is. She's also one of the sharper political minds in the Wizengamot, when she chooses to apply herself, and she has been waiting for something to apply herself to since Frank and Alice were, she stopped. She'll be useful. You said that yesterday. I'll keep saying it until it stops being true. Amelia picked up her quill. Shall I arrange it for this morning? Harry thought about his conversation with himself the previous night, about meeting people as a person before meeting them as a lord. About the difference between approaching someone with titles and approaching them as a human being who had stumbled into a complicated situation and was trying to navigate it without losing anything essential. Yes, he said. But not here. Somewhere neutral. They met Augusta Longbottom at a small tea shop in Muggle London that Amelia used for sensitive meetings, not because Augusta couldn't handle sensitive meetings in the wizarding world, but because sensitive meetings in the wizarding world had the persistent problem of being observed by people with good ears and better connections. The Muggle tea shop had excellent scones and absolutely no one who cared about Wizengamot politics. Augusta arrived before them, which Harry suspected was not an accident. She was a tall woman, formally dressed in emerald robes that were expensive without being flashy, with a hat that had a stuffed vulture on it that Harry understood, from his time at Hogwarts, was simply something Augusta Longbottom wore and nobody had ever successfully raised as an issue. She had the posture of someone who had decided many decades ago that physical comfort was for people with less self-discipline, and the eyes of someone who missed very little. She looked at Harry when they came in and he had the distinct sensation of being inventoried. He sat down across from her and looked back with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and something shifted in Augusta's expression, very small, very quick, but there. A reassessment. Lord Potter, she said. Harry, he said. Please. Very well. She poured tea for him without asking, which he found more comfortable than if she'd asked. I received the Gringotts notification at midnight. I have spent the intervening 7 hours reviewing the legal documentation, the legacy guardian statutes, and the will. She set the pot down. I would like to say that I am surprised. But you're not, Harry said. I am surprised by the scale, Augusta said. I had suspected something. Frank and Alice were close to your parents. James and Lily named them as secondary guardians, and no one ever told us. After Frank and Alice were, she stopped, gathered herself with the precision of someone who had done this many times. I raised the question of your placement with the ministry in 1982. I was told it had been handled. Handled by whom? I was not told that either. She looked at him over the rim of her teacup. I pushed for approximately 6 months and then I was made to understand that pushing further would not be productive. I have regretted stopping for 10 years. Who made you understand that? Harry asked, and he kept his voice level, asking a genuine question rather than making an accusation. Augusta met his eyes. Albus Dumbledore was not explicit. He never is. But the pressure came from his direction. She set her cup down. I want you to know that I intend to be very much more difficult to discourage going forward. Harry almost smiled. Good. My grandson, Augusta said, and her voice changed, not softer, exactly, but differently weighted, is your age. He's at Hogwarts with you. He knows you by sight, I think. We're in the same year, Harry said. Different houses. I don't know him well. You will, Augusta said. It wasn't a question. He's a good boy. He's had the past 10 years have not been simple for him either. She looked at Harry with something that was not quite apology and not quite grief but contained elements of both. He should have had you. Both of you should have had the other. Harry didn't say anything to this. He just nodded once, and Augusta seemed to understand that the nod was sufficient. What do you need from me? She asked. Practically. Politically. Harry had thought about this. I want to take my Wizengamot seats in person, he said. Not through a proxy, not through a representative. In person. Augusta raised an eyebrow. You're 11. I'm aware, Harry said. Is there a law against it? Augusta considered. A lord of an ancient and noble house has the right to sit in the Wisengamot from the moment of majority recognition, she said. The age requirement applies to general majority, but house lordship operates under a separate statute. She was speaking carefully, working through it. There are precedents. The Third Wisengamot Charter of 1612 specifically provides for. She stopped, looked at him. You've already researched this. Ragnarok mentioned the 1612 Charter, Harry said. He said it was clear. Ragnarok is almost never wrong about Wisengamot law, Augusta said. He's had 300 years to study it. She looked at him steadily. If you walk into that chamber, you will cause a significant disruption. I know. There will be people who try to have you removed. I know that too. And your plan for that is? Sit down and don't move, Harry said simply. Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment. Then she made a sound that was, Harry was fairly certain, a laugh, compressed very efficiently into a single short note. I'll sit with you, she said. In the gallery, until your seat claim is formally acknowledged. After that you won't need me in the gallery. She picked up her teacup again. I'll also make 3 calls this afternoon, people on the Wisengamot who I trust and who are going to want to be on the right side of this before it becomes obvious which side that is. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me. She said it briskly, without unkindness. This is what I should have done 10 years ago. I'm making up ground, not doing favors. The Wisengamot held emergency sessions on Thursdays. It was a Thursday. Amelia had not engineered this coincidence, but she had definitely noticed it when checking the calendar, and she had definitely not unnoticed it. She filed the formal notification of Harry's intent to claim his seats at 9:15 a.m., which gave the session coordinator approximately 3 hours of warning, which was enough time to update the seating register but not quite enough time to mount a sophisticated legal objection. By the time they arrived at the ministry at noon, the atrium was doing something that Harry had learned, in his single year at Hogwarts, was called buzzing, that specific quality of energy that spaces acquired when a lot of people all knew something interesting was happening and were all individually pretending they didn't. Witches and wizards who would normally be purposefully transiting to their offices were finding reasons to linger. The welcome, which had received approximately 40% more inquiries than usual about the location of Courtroom 10, which was where the Wisengamot assembled. Harry walked through the atrium in his new robes, dark charcoal, well-fitted, with the Potter crest at the collar in subtle silver embroidery, because Madame Malkin had understood instinctively that subtle was the correct register, and he walked the way Amelia had watched him walk since Privet Drive. Not quickly, not slowly. Not looking around for approval or reaction. Looking forward, at where he was going, with the particular quality of someone who had decided on a direction and saw no reason to second-guess it. Kingsley was on his left. Amelia on his right. Augusta Longbottom had arrived ahead of them and was waiting at the lift, already in conversation with a heavy-set wizard in plum-colored robes who looked startled by whatever she was saying to him. They took the lift down. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't much that needed saying. The corridor outside Courtroom 10 had benches along both walls, and both walls of benches were nearly full of witches and wizards in Wisengamot robes who had come early for the session and were now watching the lift doors with the focused attention of people who had been told something interesting was coming and were reserving judgment. Harry looked at them as he stepped out of the lift and he didn't slow down. He recognized 2 faces. Lucius Malfoy was near the doors, in conversation with another man in expensive robes, and he turned when Harry came into the corridor with the smooth unhurriedness of someone who had decided on their response in advance and was executing it. He was, Harry had to acknowledge, impressively composed. A tall, elegant man with pale blonde hair and silver-topped cane, who looked at Harry the way you look at something you have assessed and found less dangerous than reported. Lord Potter, Malfoy said. He said it the way you say something you expected to be harder to say. Lord Malfoy, Harry said, and kept walking. He heard the slight pause that followed, the fractional hesitation of a man recalibrating, and he filed it away. The second face he recognized was Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, who was standing near the courtroom doors and looking like a man who had received a lot of owls this morning and had enjoyed none of them. Fudge was pink in the face and anxious in the particular way of men who preferred their problems to be theoretical rather than physical, and Harry walking down this corridor had transformed his problem from theoretical to extremely physical. "Lord Potter," Fudge said, and he'd clearly practiced it but it still came out slightly strangled. That is, the Ministry is, of course, delighted to formally, thank you, Minister," Harry said, without stopping. "I appreciate the warm welcome." Fudge turned to watch him go with an expression that suggested he was rethinking several recent decisions. Inside Courtroom 10, the tiered benches of the Wizengamot arranged in their semicircle were approximately two-thirds full, with more members filing in as word spread that this session was going to be worth attending. The Chief Warlock's seat at the head was empty. Dumbledore had not arrived yet, which was either a strategic choice or a logistical one. Harry suspected the former. The seating coordinator, a harried woman with a clipboard who had clearly been having the worst morning of her career, met them at the door. "Lord Potter." "Yes." Your seats are in the second tier, family positions 4 through, well. There are several." She looked at her clipboard with the expression of someone whose clipboard had betrayed her. "Normally we'd assign a temporary position for a first session, but given the number of house seats, where's the traditional Potter seat?" Harry asked. She consulted the clipboard. "Third tier, center section." "It's been occupied, then that one," said Harry. "The Potter seat. That's where I'll sit." "The seat has been in use it's the Potter seat," Harry said pleasantly. "I'm the Lord Potter. I'd like to sit in it." The coordinator looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone who was not going to be helpful here. The coordinator looked back at Harry, seemed to make a decision about where the path of least resistance lay, and wrote something on her clipboard. "Third tier, center section," she said. "Right." Harry went and sat down. The seat was old, the wood worn smooth by decades of use, with the faint impressions of the Potter crest worked into the back panel. It had been used as a proxy seat, which meant technically occupied but not personally sat in. Harry sat in it and felt the same settling he'd felt at Gringotts with the rings, something old and structural clicking into place. Augusta settled in the gallery with the satisfied expression of someone watching a well-executed tactical maneuver. Around the chamber, Wizengamot members who had been conducting quiet conversations stopped conducting them. Lucius Malfoy came in and took his seat in the first tier and looked at Harry across the chamber with an expression that was thoughtful rather than hostile, which Harry found more interesting. Pure hostility was a known quantity. Thoughtfulness was something that could go several directions. Then Dumbledore arrived. He came in through the side door that connected to the Chief Warlock's antechamber, in his usual robes, midnight blue today, with silver stars, the half-moon spectacles, the long white beard, the whole assembled image of the most powerful wizard in Britain going about his ordinary morning. He moved with the unhurried serenity of someone who had walked into difficult rooms for 70 years and had never once needed to hurry. He sat in the Chief Warlock's chair. He looked across the chamber. His eyes found Harry, sitting in the Potter seat, in new robes, with 3 signet rings on his right hand and a 4th on his left, and Dumbledore's face did something extremely controlled and extremely fast that Harry suspected nobody else in the room had caught. He caught it. He held Dumbledore's gaze without any particular expression on his own face. Not challenging, not aggressive, not, performatively, anything. Just watching. The way you watch something you have thought carefully about and are now seeing in person for the first time. Dumbledore held his gaze for 3 seconds and then opened his agenda parchment. "The Wizengamot is called to session," he said, and his voice had all the warmth and authority it always had, which Harry had noticed was the thing about genuinely powerful speakers. The voice didn't change with the situation. It couldn't be rattled loose. "We will begin with the formal business of point of recognition," said Harry. Silence. Not surprised silence, exactly. The kind of silence that happens when something anticipated actually occurs. Half the chamber had been waiting for this and the other half had been told to expect it by the half that was waiting. Dumbledore looked at him. "The chair recognizes Lord Potter," he said, and his voice didn't change at all, which was almost more impressive than if it had. Harry stood. He didn't have notes. He didn't need them. "I'd like to formally register the activation of the following seats," he said, and he named them clearly, each one, Potter through Peveril, through the Alliance seats, without rushing, his voice carrying in the stone chamber the way voices did when the speaker wasn't afraid of the room. 11 houses. As he named each one, the seating register on the official clerk's desk, an enchanted document that recorded all seat activations in real time, made a small, definitive sound, like a mechanism engaging. 11 times. When he finished, he sat back down. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then it broke, not loudly, not chaotically, but with the particular sound of 40 people deciding simultaneously whether to speak, and about a third of them starting to. Dumbledore held up a hand and the noise subsided. "The registry acknowledges the seat activations," he said, with the serenity of a man who had decided that controlled acknowledgement was more useful than opposition. "Welcome to the Wizengamot, Lord Potter." "Thank you," Harry said. "I have a number of motions to file." Another beat. "This session," Dumbledore said carefully, "is scheduled for—" "I'm aware of the agenda," Harry said. "My motions don't require a full session. I'd like to file them for the record and schedule the appropriate hearings." He reached into his robes. Amelia had prepared this, the night before, a slim folder of parchment, and he produced the motions. The first concerns the administrative appointment records for the Potter family Alliance seats for the period November 1981 to present. The second concerns 3 specific property transfers from the Potter estate. The third, he paused, and here he looked directly at Dumbledore for the first time since the recognition, concerns the Hogwarts governance seats and the circumstances of their current administrative assignment. Dumbledore looked at him. Harry looked back. "They'll be filed through the proper channels," Harry said pleasantly, and handed them to the clerk. Lucius Malfoy caught up with him in the corridor afterward. Not aggressively, he peeled away from the group he'd been walking with and fell into step alongside Harry with the practiced ease of someone who had engineered casual conversations at strategic moments for 30 years. Kingsley, half a step behind, didn't move to intercept. Harry had said, very specifically, on the way in, "If Malfoy wants to talk, let him talk." "An impressive entrance," Malfoy said. "I just sat down," Harry said. "Yes. Precisely." Malfoy's tone was appreciative in the particular way of someone who was deciding whether a problem was also an opportunity. The Malfoy family has had significant interests in several of the former Alliance seat territories. "I thought it would be worthwhile to introduce myself properly." "We've met," said Harry. "Diagon Alley. Last year. You were with your son." "So we did." "You have a good memory." "I remember things that matter," Harry said, without inflection. They walked for a moment. Malfoy adjusted his cane in his grip, a small movement, habitual. "There are, naturally, legal questions about the territories and their management during the interregnum period," he said. "I'd hope that we might approach those questions constructively." "I'm sure we will," Harry said. "Constructively, with complete documentation, through the appropriate legal channels." He glanced at Malfoy sidelong. "I'm looking forward to seeing all the documentation, actually." Another fractional pause. Malfoy recovered it in under a second, which was genuinely impressive. "Of course," he said. "The Malfoy family's records are entirely in order." "Wonderful," said Harry. "Then there's nothing to worry about." They'd reached the lift. Malfoy stopped, because the lift was Harry's direction and clearly not Malfoy's. He looked at Harry with those careful, intelligent eyes that were performing friendliness over something considerably more specific. "You're not what I expected," he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said. Harry looked at him. "I know," he said. "That's useful." He stepped into the lift. Amelia was beside him. As the doors closed, she looked at the middle distance again with the expression she'd been wearing all morning, the one that was professionally neutral and personally entertained. "That was well done," she said. "He's smart," Harry said. "Very. He had 3 properties in the Alliance territories. I saw his name in the Gringotts records." Harry looked at the lift doors. "Not stolen, exactly, purchased during the interregnum period at below-value rates from the estate administrator." The estate administrator being Dumbledore's office. Harry's voice was even. "Malfoy isn't worried about the legal challenge. He's worried about what else the documentation shows." Amelia looked at him. "He paid Dumbledore's office for the properties," Harry said. "Which means there's a financial connection between them that isn't public. Which means Malfoy is not just nervous about losing the properties." He looked at her. "He's nervous about what proving the properties were improperly sold would reveal about who he's been paying." The lift arrived at the atrium. Amelia stepped out and walked 3 steps and stopped. "Harry," she said. "Yes? How long have you been thinking about that?" "Since I saw his name in the ledger at Gringotts," Harry said. "Yesterday." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "You could have told me. I wanted to see how he'd approach me first." Harry started walking toward the exit. "Now I know." Clearwater met them outside the ministry with a sealed envelope from the Wisengamot clerk and the expression of someone who had been doing a great deal of very fast legal work. "The motions have been filed," she said, falling into step. "Dumbledore's office has 48 hours to respond before they're automatically scheduled for hearing." She hesitated. "His office sent a request for a private meeting." "With Lord Potter?" "This afternoon." Harry looked at the envelope in her hand. "Where?" "Hogwarts. The headmaster's office." "No," said Harry. Clearwater made a note. "Tell his office I'm available for a meeting at the ministry, in a formal meeting room, with my legal representative and Director Bones present, at his earliest convenience." Harry paused. "And that I look forward to the conversation." Clearwater made another note. She was, Harry had noticed, excellent at keeping her face entirely professional while writing down things that were clearly delighting her. They went back to the safe house. It was mid-afternoon and the adrenaline of the morning was settling into something more sustainable, not tiredness, exactly, but the recalibration that followed sustained effort. Harry changed out of his formal robes, fed Hedwig, and came back to the kitchen to find Tonks and Kingsley debriefing at the table and Amelia on her 3rd cup of tea of the afternoon. "Dumbledore didn't fight it," Tonks was saying. "That's interesting, right? He had grounds to challenge the recognition. Technically, he could have requested a delay pending the Hogwarts governance review. He made a choice," Kingsley said. "He decided that fighting the recognition publicly was a worse position than accepting it and managing the aftermath." "He's right," Harry said, sitting down. "If he'd challenged it in the chamber, it would have been Dumbledore opposing Harry Potter's basic right to his own inheritance. That's an unwinnable position publicly. So instead he lets you in," Tonks said, "and deals with the motions as a separate issue." "Where he has more room to maneuver," Harry confirmed. "The governance seats are complicated. There's a genuine argument to be made that an 11-year-old shouldn't have curriculum authority over Hogwarts." He paused. "It's wrong, but it's a reasonable-sounding argument." "What do you actually want with the governance seats?" Amelia asked. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. Harry thought about it. "Not to run the school," he said. "I'm a student. I want to sit in the seat so he can't use it. And I want the record to show that for 11 years, those seats were used without authorization." He looked at her. The governance records from those years, what the seats voted for, what policies they influenced, that's the document I actually want. Because, Amelia said slowly, if the governance seats were used without authorization, then every vote they influenced is potentially invalid, Harry said. Including staff appointments. He paused. Including his own appointment as headmaster, depending on when the seat was first used and what the applicable charter says. The table was quiet. You're not trying to remove him, Tonks said. Not yet, Harry said. I'm trying to make the case that everything he's done in those seats is reviewable. Which makes him want to negotiate rather than fight. Kingsley said, very quietly, you're 11. Ragnarok made a similar observation, Harry said. I'm told it's accurate. The owl from Dumbledore came at 5 p.m. Harry was on the window seat in the study, reading about Wisengamot procedural history, which was less boring than it sounded because Ragnarok had given him a copy of the Gringotts annotated edition which included commentary from 300 years of goblin legal scholars who had opinions about everything. The owl was a school owl, not Fawkes, interestingly, which said something. Fawkes would have made a statement. A school owl was neutral, professional, an attempt at appropriate register. The letter was handwritten, in Dumbledore's familiar looping script. Harry had seen it on a number of school notices and on the letter that had originally invited him to Hogwarts. Dear Harry, it has been a remarkable morning. I suspect, from the motions filed today, that you have many questions I am long overdue in answering. I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you, not as headmaster and student, but simply as two people who share an investment in the same world. I hope you know that everything I have done has been done with your safety and the safety of our world at heart. Albus Harry read it twice. He turned it over in his hands. He noted the use of Harry rather than Lord Potter. The framing of simply as two people, which was attempting to flatten the power differential that had just spent a morning being very publicly reasserted. The line about safety, which was both true and insufficient and knew it. He got out a piece of parchment and wrote his reply. Dear Professor Dumbledore, I share your interest in speaking. I have arranged a formal meeting room at the Ministry for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Director Bones and my legal representative will be present. I look forward to getting answers to my questions. Harry Potter, Lord of House Potter. He sealed it and gave it to the school owl, who received it with the dignity of a creature that had been given more charged correspondence than it cared to think about. Hedwig, on the windowsill, watched the school owl depart and made a sound that managed to convey something between disdain and satisfaction. I know, Harry told her. That evening, Amelia knocked on the study door and put her head in. Susan is here, she said. If you'd like to meet her. Harry closed the Wisengamot procedural history. Yes. Susan Bones was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of pumpkin juice and the slightly self-conscious energy of someone who had been given a lot of information in the last 12 hours and was still organizing it. She was his age, round-faced, steady-eyed, with the Bones family red-brown hair that Amelia shared. She looked at Harry when he came in with an expression that was trying to be polite and also was clearly evaluating him. He sat down across from her. Amelia found something to do at the other end of the kitchen that was definitely not leaving them to it but was absolutely leaving them to it. Hi, said Harry. Hi, said Susan. A pause. So apparently our families are legally connected. Apparently, Harry said. Aunt Amelia explained the legacy guardian thing. She turned her pumpkin juice glass in her hands. She said my dad, that he should have been involved in. She stopped. She said you should have had people. Yeah, said Harry. I'm sorry, Susan said. That you didn't. Harry looked at her. She'd said it simply, the way you say things that are true and don't need dressing up, and he found himself appreciating the straightforwardness of it. Thank you, he said. Same, about your dad. They sat with that for a moment. Two 11-year-olds in a kitchen in Edinburgh with a shared legal inheritance they hadn't asked for and a shared understanding of what absence felt like. Are you going back to Hogwarts? Susan asked. September, Harry said. Yes. I'm in Hufflepuff, she said. You're in Gryffindor. Unfortunately you have one of my founder seats, Harry said, and then registered that this had come out more blandly than intended. I meant, the Hufflepuff governance seat. It's technically, I'm not going to do anything with it, Susan blinked. Then she started laughing. It was a genuine laugh, unguarded, the kind that happened when something was actually funny rather than politely funny. You own Hufflepuff, she said. Technically, said Harry. Don't tell the other Hufflepuffs. They'll be insufferable about house pride. Harry almost smiled. I won't. Amelia, at the other end of the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water and said absolutely nothing and kept her back turned and was clearly listening to every word. I'll see you at Hogwarts, Susan said. In September. Yes, Harry said. Don't be weird about the legal connection thing, she said. Just be normal. Okay, Harry said. You too. Deal, said Susan, and picked up her pumpkin juice, and that was that. Later, after Susan had gone and the house was settling into its evening quiet, Harry went back to the window seat and watched Edinburgh go dark again and thought about tomorrow's meeting with Dumbledore. He wasn't angry. He'd tested that feeling several times in the last 3 days, reached for it deliberately, the way you press a bruise to see how deep it goes, and it was there, but it wasn't what he was running on. What he was running on was something cleaner and more structural. The anger would come and go. The work would stay. Tomorrow, Dumbledore would walk into a ministry meeting room expecting to find an 11-year-old boy who needed managing. Who could be redirected with warmth and reassurance and the weight of 70 years of authority. Harry looked at his hands. The rings. His father's letter, folded in his breast pocket where he'd been putting it every morning. What Dumbledore would actually find was something else entirely. And the morning after that, and the one after that, the Wisengamot would begin working through the motions, and the documentation would come out, and the record would be written that couldn't be unwritten, and Lucius Malfoy would eventually realize that the financial connection he'd been hoping wouldn't see daylight was about to see a great deal of it, and Augusta Longbottom would have her 48 hours of organized fury and then she would go to work. And Harry Potter, Lord of 11 houses, heir of 12 titles, boy who had slept in a cupboard and woken up in Edinburgh and walked into a bank and walked out wearing history on his hands, would do what he'd been doing since the morning Amelia knocked on his door. He would sit down and not move. He would let the law do what the law was built for. And he would wait to see who, in the end, was actually afraid of whom. Chapter 4, Old Debts. The ministry meeting room was deliberately unremarkable. That was the point of it, a neutral space, no house colors, no portraits of historical figures who might have opinions, plain walls and a rectangular table and chairs that were comfortable without being impressive. Amelia used it for sensitive interviews and it served the purpose of stripping context away. When there was nothing decorative to signal who had home advantage, the advantage defaulted to whoever had come in with the better preparation. Harry arrived at 8:40 and rearranged the chairs. Not dramatically, he shifted 2 of them, moving the natural configuration from the traditional head-of-table versus side-of-table dynamic to something more genuinely oppositional, both parties facing each other across the width of the table rather than the length. Clearwater, coming in behind him with her notes, observed this and made a small adjustment of her own, setting her documentation at the position that now naturally sat at Harry's shoulder rather than across from him. Amelia leaned against the wall near the door and watched these small tactical adjustments with the expression of someone enjoying a masterclass. "He'll notice," she said. "Good," said Harry. Dumbledore arrived at precisely 9. He came in with 2 people, a young woman Harry didn't recognize, who turned out to be a legal secretary from Hogwarts Board of Governors, and Minerva McGonagall, who was Harry's head of house and who looked, when she saw Harry across the table, like she was experiencing several emotions simultaneously and was managing all of them with the iron self-discipline of a woman who had been a transfiguration teacher for 40 years. "Harry," she said, and her voice had something in it that she probably hadn't intended to be audible. "Professor McGonagall," Harry said. "Good morning." She sat. She said nothing else. But she kept looking at him in the way that people looked at things when they were recalibrating their understanding of them in real time. Dumbledore sat down across from Harry and folded his hands on the table and looked at him over the half-moon spectacles with that expression, the warm, ancient, infinitely patient expression that Harry had seen in his first year and had found reassuring and was now finding considerably more complicated. The expression of a man who had decided the way to play this was as himself, wise, gentle, willing to explain. "Harry," he said. The warmth was genuine. That was the difficult part, the warmth was never not genuine. "I'm glad you agreed to meet." "I'm glad you agreed to my terms for it," Harry said pleasantly. A fractional pause. "Of course." Dumbledore looked at the table configuration, said nothing about it, and Harry noted that he didn't look at Amelia when he said it, which meant he'd already absorbed her presence and moved past it. "I imagine you have questions." "Several," Harry said. "But let's start with the ones that have documentary answers." He looked at Clearwater, who opened the folder. "The Potter Estate Administrative Records," Harry said. "From November 1981 to present. Specifically the authorization records for the Alliance Seat Management. I'd like to understand the legal basis on which the Chief Warlock's office assumed administrative authority." Dumbledore's legal secretary started to reach for her own folder. Dumbledore stopped her with a small gesture, just 2 fingers raised from the table, barely a movement, but she stopped immediately. "The situation in the days after your parents' deaths was," Dumbledore began, "extraordinarily complex. Voldemort had fallen. Many of our established institutions were in disarray. The Ministry was." "I understand the context," Harry said. "I'd like the documentation." Dumbledore looked at him. Truly looked at him, in the way Harry had noticed very powerful people sometimes did when they encountered something that didn't fit their model, a long, calibrating look that was partly assessment and partly something that might have been, under other circumstances, respect. "There is documentation," Dumbledore said. "It's not straightforward." "I have time," said Harry. "The authorization was filed under emergency administrative powers granted to the Chief Warlock during periods of institutional crisis," Dumbledore said. "The applicable statute is the Ministerial Continuity Act of 1945, which was invoked on November 2, 1981. "I know the act," Harry said. "Clearwater." Clearwater produced a parchment. "The Ministerial Continuity Act of 1945 grants emergency administrative powers over orphaned estates to the Chief Warlock for a period not exceeding 90 days, pending formal Wisengamot review. The formal review was required by February 1, 1982. She set the parchment on the table. "There is no record of a formal review occurring." Silence. "The 90-day period expired," Harry said. "After which all administrative authority over the Potter estate reverted, by statute, to the Gringotts' inheritance hold. Which meant nobody had legal authority over those seats after February 1982. He looked at Dumbledore. "And yet the seats continued to be administered from your office." McGonagall had gone very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once. The warmth was still there, but behind it was something that Harry identified as the careful discomfort of a man who had not, in a very long time, sat across a table from someone prepared to be more precise than him. "You're right," Dumbledore said. And then, because he was who he was, he said it without deflection, without hedging, which was its own kind of move. "The review should have occurred. It did not. What I will tell you, Harry, and I need you to hear this as I mean it, not as a legal deflection, is that every decision I made in that period was made with your survival as the primary concern. The blood wards on Privet Drive required my presence in that house," Harry said. "Not in that room. Not with those locks. Not under those conditions." He kept his voice flat, not cold, not heated, just clear. The blood wards were an argument for me to be in my aunt's house. They were not an argument for anything that happens in the welfare reports. McGonagall made a sound. Very small. She covered it immediately. No, said Dumbledore quietly. They were not. And Sirius Black, Harry said. The name landed in the room with a particular weight. Sirius Black was convicted, Dumbledore began. Without a trial, Harry said. I've checked. There is no trial record. He was sent to Azkaban directly. He looked at Dumbledore. He was named in my parents' will as my primary guardian. A man named as primary guardian in a legitimate will should have received a trial before being imprisoned. He paused. Particularly when the primary evidence against him was testimony from a man who had already faked his own death and was, as far as I understand, still very much alive. Dumbledore was very still. Peter Pettigrew, Harry said. McGonagall's quill cracked in her hand. She looked down at it, then set it on the table with the precision of someone concentrating very hard on small physical tasks. How? Dumbledore said, and for the first time, the warmth was operating at reduced capacity, and what was underneath it was something older and more guarded. Do you know about Pettigrew? Gringotts' inheritance documentation, Harry said. The Secret Keeper records for Godric's Hollow. The Secret Keeper was changed from Sirius Black to Peter Pettigrew 12 days before my parents died. There's a Gringotts notarization on the change, because it affected the property security protocols on the Godric's Hollow house, which was a Potter estate property. He reached into his robes and produced a copy of the document. Ragnok had given it to him without being asked, which said something about Ragnok. Sirius Black was not the Secret Keeper when Voldemort found my parents. Peter Pettigrew was. The room was quiet for a long time. Dumbledore looked at the document. He looked at it for long enough that Harry knew he wasn't reading it, he was making decisions. Sirius Black, Dumbledore said, is in Azkaban. Yes, said Harry. He shouldn't be. Harry, the situation is complicated, Harry said. I know. I'd like to add it to the list of complications we're working through. He looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at Dumbledore with an expression that said she had been aware of this particular complication since approximately 2 a.m. this morning when Harry had found the notarization document and knocked on her door. Sirius Black's case, Amelia said, in her departmental voice, will be reviewed by the DMLE. That is now on record. She looked at Dumbledore steadily. The Gringotts notarization is primary evidence that his conviction, if a conviction can be said to exist without a trial, was based on a fundamental factual error. We will be moving quickly. Dumbledore looked at Amelia, then back at Harry. You've been busy, he said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite admiring and was not quite wary and lived in the complicated country between the two. I've been reading, Harry said. I had a lot of time. After Dumbledore left, with his legal secretary and with McGonagall, who paused in the doorway and looked back at Harry with an expression that he couldn't fully categorize but that felt like something being renegotiated, Amelia sat down across from where she'd been standing and pressed her hands flat on the table. Sirius Black, she said. The document is solid, Harry said. The document is solid. The problem is that solid documentation and 12 years in Azkaban are two entirely different categories of problem, and Azkaban, she stopped. People don't come out of Azkaban well, Harry. I know, he said. He'd read about Dementors. He'd read about what they did to people. But he's there for something he didn't do. That comes before the rest of it. Amelia nodded once. She picked up her quill. I'll open the case review today. It'll take time, I need to establish proper jurisdiction, and the Black family political situation is going to complicate things because Sirius's imprisonment was politically convenient for a number of people who are still in positions to make noise about it. She paused. It'll take weeks. Maybe longer. However long it takes, Harry said. He's been there 12 years. A few more weeks won't change that. He looked at the table. But I want him out. I know, said Amelia. They sat for a moment. Clearwater had packed her notes and stepped out to give them space, which Harry appreciated. The meeting went well, Amelia said. He's going to look for a way to reframe the governance seats argument, Harry said. He'll try the minors' rights angle, that I can claim the seats but can't exercise voting authority until I reach a certain age. There's precedent on both sides. Which means it'll go to a hearing, which means it'll be public, which means whatever documentation the hearing requires will be part of the public record. Harry looked at her. That's what I want. The documentation public. Not the vote. Amelia looked at him for a moment. You're not fighting for the governance authority. I'm fighting for the record, Harry said. Once it's public, anyone who wants to challenge anything Dumbledore's office voted for in those seats in the last decade has the grounds to do it. I don't need to do it personally. You're creating a mechanism, Amelia said slowly. I'm using the one that already exists, Harry said. I just need to get the right documents into the right places. They were back in the atrium by 11, walking toward the flue, when Harry heard his name. Not Lord Potter, not the formal register. Just his name, in a boy's voice, from somewhere to his left near the fountain. He looked. Neville Longbottom was standing next to a towering woman in emerald robes and a vulture hat, holding a large envelope, and looking at Harry with the expression of someone who had been brought to the ministry for a specific reason and had just realized that the reason was significantly more specific than he'd been led to believe. Neville was round-faced, soft-spoken in the way his posture suggested before he even opened his mouth, and he was wearing robes that were slightly too large, the kind of slightly too large that happened when someone had grown but the person buying the robes had been conservative about it. He looked at Harry with a combination of recognition. They'd nodded at each other in corridors at Hogwarts, the vague acknowledgement of two people in the same year who hadn't yet found their way to each other, and something more complicated than recognition. Augusta Longbottom looked at Harry and then at Amelia and then at the envelope in Neville's hand. Good timing, she said, with the satisfaction of a woman who had arranged good timing. Harry walked over. Hi, said Neville. Hi, said Harry. You're Neville. Yeah. Neville looked at the envelope. Gran brought me. She said something about your family and my family and that I should probably understand what she was talking about. He held the envelope out slightly. She gave me the Gringotts letter to read on the way here. The Legacy Guardian thing. Yeah, Harry said. I know there's a lot of information. My parents, Neville said, and his voice did something careful on those two words, the careful of something that had been handled many times and was handled carefully each time as a result. They were supposed to be they were named in your parents' will. Yes. And nobody told Gran. Nobody told anyone, Harry said. That's the problem I'm trying to fix. Neville looked at him for a moment. He had his grandmother's eyes, not the color, but the quality of them, the way they took things in and held them. I visit them, he said. My mum and dad. At St. Mungo's. He paused. Every Christmas and Easter. Harry didn't say anything. He just waited. They don't know who I am, Neville said. They haven't, for as long as I can remember. He looked at the fountain. Gran says they were the best Aurors of their generation. Before, he stopped. I used to wonder if they'd have been different with me. If they'd known I was, if things had been different. I wonder the same thing, Harry said. About mine. Neville looked at him. The thing about Neville, the thing Harry was realizing, standing here in the ministry atrium, was that he was quietly, entirely honest. There was no performance to him. He said things because they were true, and he listened to things because he actually heard them. Gran says you're trying to sort everything out, Neville said. The legal stuff. Yes. Can I help? Harry blinked. It wasn't a question he'd expected. "I'm 11, Neville said, with a kind of resigned awareness of his own limitations, and I'm not good at magic like you are. But Gran says the legacy guardian thing means our families are connected, and," he stopped, looked at his shoes, then back up. "I'd rather be part of it than just read about it later." Harry thought about the conversation with Susan, the previous evening, just be normal, and about his father's letter and the careful optimism of a man who'd named the right people and trusted them to find each other. "Do you want to get lunch?" Harry asked. Neville blinked. "What? It's almost noon. We haven't eaten." Harry looked at Augusta. "You're welcome too." Augusta Longbottom looked at Harry Potter with those sharp eyes and said, "I have a 1 o'clock meeting with the Legal Review Board. But Neville can stay." "Gran," said Neville. "You're 11, said Augusta. "Not 6. And you're in safe hands." She looked at Harry with an expression that was not quite approval, because Augusta Longbottom was not a woman who gave approval easily, but was the nearest adjacent thing. "I'll collect him at 3. She left. She did it the way she did everything, with absolute directional certainty and no backward glances. Neville looked at Harry. "She likes you," he said. "How can you tell?" "She didn't test you," Neville said. "She usually tests people. She asked me 4 questions in the car." He considered. "She must have decided you already passed." They went to a small place in the Leaky Cauldron that Tom kept for private luncheons, and Tonks joined them because she'd been lurking in the atrium with her naturally forgettable face on, and Harry had waved her over, partly for company and partly because Neville had looked slightly overwhelmed and Tonks had the specific gift of making overwhelmed people feel like the situation was manageable. Within 10 minutes, Tonks had accidentally knocked her water glass into her soup, turned her hair orange by reflex, turned it back, and told a story about a ministry enforcement operation that involved a rogue Niffler and 3 members of the Wisengamot that made Neville laugh so hard he choked on a bread roll. Harry watched this and felt something that took him a moment to name. It was the feeling of a table. A specific kind of table, the kind people built without thinking about it, out of whoever was in the room, because they wanted to be somewhere rather than just at somewhere. He'd seen it at Hogwarts, the Gryffindor table at breakfast, which had this quality on good mornings, and he'd sat at the edge of it without quite belonging to it, not excluded, just adjacent. This table, in the private room in the Leaky Cauldron, with Neville still catching his breath and Tonks already launching into the follow-up story, this had the quality of something being assembled on purpose. "You should meet Susan Bones," Harry said to Neville. Neville wiped his eyes. "The Hufflepuff? She's connected to all of this too. Bones' family. Same situation." He paused. "She told me not to be weird about it. She's good." "Maybe at Hogwarts," Neville said. "Maybe before," Harry said. "We have the rest of summer." Neville looked at him with an expression that was trying not to be too visibly hopeful and not quite managing it. "I'm usually at Longbottom Manor," he said. "Gran does not have a particularly active social calendar." "Augusta Longbottom," said Tonks, "would absolutely terrorize a social calendar if given the opportunity." "I'm just saying." "She really would," Neville agreed, with the pride of a boy who had watched his grandmother terrorize several things and had complicated feelings about how much he admired it. Harry turned his water glass in his hands. "There's something else," he said. "Something I should probably tell you, since he paused, finding the right word for what they were in the process of becoming. "Since we're going to be part of the same situation." Neville waited. "The people who hurt your parents," Harry said. "Bellatrix Lestrange. The others." He kept his voice even. "They're in Azkaban. The Lestranges were convicted." "Yeah," said Neville. He said it in the same way he'd said "my parents," carefully. "I know. They were convicted," Harry said, "but the trial was handled through a process that's now under scrutiny. Not specifically their trial, the trials were more properly conducted than Sirius Black's, which had no trial at all, but the evidence presented and the advocacy available, he stopped. I'm not saying they should be free. I'm saying the process was broken, and I want to make sure that's on the record. That if anything is ever challenged, the record already shows that we know it was broken. Neville was looking at him with an expression of careful attention that Harry was recognizing as his particular mode of absorbing difficult information. Are you worried they'll get out? I'm not worried about it right now, Harry said honestly. I'm building records that make it harder for anything to go wrong quietly. He looked at Neville. I thought you should know. Because your family is in this, and you deserve to know what this is. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need me to do? For now? Nothing. Harry almost smiled. Eat your lunch. Neville ate his lunch. So did Harry. Tonks, who had been quietly listening to the last exchange with an expression stripped of its usual performance, flagged Tom for dessert and asked for whatever was good, and Tom brought something caramelized that nobody could quite identify but that was unambiguously excellent. It was, Harry thought, a pretty good lunch. Luna Lovegood found him in Flourish and Blots at 2:30. He ducked in while Neville was waiting for Augusta outside the ministry. Clearwater needed a reference text for the Wisengamot procedural hearings and Flourish and Blots was 2 streets over, so Harry had gone, because he'd been in Diagon Alley and hadn't yet found a reason not to move around it freely, and he found he liked the idea of that. Moving around freely. It was a new thing to like. He was in the legal text section, a narrow aisle at the back, the books there older and less decorative than the front-of-store displays, when he became aware of someone beside him. She was reading the spine of a book on Wisengamot procedural history with the focused serenity of someone who found legal texts genuinely interesting rather than necessary, which placed her in a small category of people. She was blonde, very pale, with large silvery eyes that looked at things with slightly more attention than most eyes managed, as though she was seeing something additional in everything. She was wearing robes that had clearly been altered by hand, with small painted moons along the hem. She turned from the book to look at him. You're Harry Potter, she said. You sat in the Wisengamot yesterday. Yes, said Harry. I read about it in the Quibbler this morning, she said. My father runs it. He said it was the most interesting thing to happen in the Wisengamot since the Goblin Rights hearing of 1867, though he also said the Rotfong conspiracy was accelerating, so context is important. She said all of this with the same calm inflection, as if the conspiracy and the Wisengamot were of equivalent journalistic weight. What's the Rotfong conspiracy? Harry asked. Luna looked at him with something that might have been appreciation. Most people don't ask, she said. They just look uncomfortable. I'm genuinely asking. My father believes that certain elements of the ministry are working to bring down magical society from within using a combination of dark magic and gum disease, Luna said. The evidence is contested. But he's right about the ministry elements, I think. He just has the mechanism slightly wrong. She looked at the book again. You're looking for the Third Wisengamot Charter of 1612. Harry blinked. Yes. It's on the 4th shelf from the left, between the Goblin Treaty Compendium and the Beetle Commentary. She moved along the aisle without looking up. They shelve it wrong every time. It should be in primary charters, not secondary precedents. Harry found the book exactly where she'd said it was. Luna Lovegood, she said, by way of introduction that had been delayed by the natural flow of things. 5th year, well, upcoming. My mother died when I was 9. My father and I live in Ottery St. Catchpole. She said all of this the way she said everything, as information, offered without performance. You're doing something important. With the houses. I think so, Harry said. The Quibbler will cover it properly, she said. My father doesn't have the infrastructure of the Prophet, but he doesn't have the Prophet's editors either, which is currently an advantage. She turned one of the books in her hands. People think we're not serious. That's useful sometimes. Harry looked at her. Would your father want to interview me? Luna considered this with the same calm she brought to everything. He would love to. He'd probably ask you about Nargles as well, which are real but not relevant to your current situation. That's fine, Harry said. You mean it? If the Quibbler is going to cover it seriously, I'd rather talk to them than wait for the Prophet to decide what angle they're running. He thought about the morning paper, the headline someone had decided on, the narrative that had already been shaped without him. I want to say things on my own terms. Luna looked at him with those attentive eyes. You're very deliberate, she said. For someone who's been deliberated about for 11 years without any input. The sentence landed with precision. Yes, Harry said simply. I'll tell my father. She replaced the book she'd been holding with the careful attention she gave to everything. Xenophilius will be very pleased. He's been saying something was wrong with the whole situation for years. He wrote 3 editorials about it. Nobody published responses because people don't respond to the Quibbler, but he was right. He was right, Harry agreed. Luna looked at him. I'll see you at Hogwarts, she said, with the same certainty Susan had said it, the certainty of someone for whom what would happen had already been decided and the details were just catching up. I'm in Ravenclaw. You have the Ravenclaw governance seat. I do, said Harry. Don't change anything about how they do things, she said. The system's wrong, but the house is good. The system just needs better people in it. She picked up a different book, something about Crumplehorn Snorkax, which Harry decided not to inquire about, and drifted further into the stacks. Harry stood in the legal texts aisle with the 1612 charter and thought about the strange alchemy of 2 days outside a house that had kept him small, and how many people had been waiting in the periphery of a life he hadn't been allowed to live. Amelia was waiting outside. She had 3 new owls and the expression she wore when she had information she was sorting into categories. The motions are officially scheduled, she said, falling into step. The governance seat hearing is in 3 weeks. The property transfer hearing is in 4. She paused. Lucius Malfoy has retained 3 barristers. 3, said Harry. He's being thorough. He's being nervous, Harry said. 3 barristers means he's expecting the documentation to be worse than he can handle with 1. He looked at the book in his hand. What else? Dumbledore's office filed a response to the governance seat motion. He's citing the Educational Trust Charter as superseding the founder seat governance rights. She handed him the parchment. It's a reasonable argument. Harry read it on the walk. The Educational Trust Charter was established in 1492, he said. Before the Family Magic Preservation Act of 1693. Under the temporal hierarchy doctrine, the later act supersedes the earlier charter in cases of direct conflict. Amelia stopped walking. Harry looked up. I spent 3 hours on Ragnarok's annotated edition last night, he said. The temporal hierarchy doctrine is in Chapter 7. Ragnarok annotated it himself. He showed her the margin of the 1612 charter, where he'd already written a small note in pencil. Clearwater can write the response. Amelia looked at the penciled note, at the margin of a 400-year-old legal text, written in a 12-year-old's precise handwriting. She looked at it for a moment. My niece, she said, told me last night that you were easy to talk to. She's good, said Harry. She also said, and I'm quoting directly, that you seemed like the kind of person who would be a lot to deal with if he was on your bad side but was probably worth knowing if he wasn't. Harry considered this. That's accurate, he said. I thought so. Amelia started walking again. Come on. Clearwater needs the charter. That evening the Quibbler's owl arrived with a letter from Xenophilius Lovegood that was enthusiastic to the point of mild alarm and contained 4 separate references to things Harry had never heard of, plus a genuine and detailed list of questions that were, once you stripped away the Nargles and the Rotfong conspiracy, substantive and smart. Harry read it twice and wrote back confirming the interview for the following week, and added a note asking if Luna would be present, because he found that the presence of someone who said exactly what she thought was useful when the alternative was talking to someone who was deciding what to think while they spoke to him. He was at the desk in the study when Tonks knocked. "You've got another owl," she said. "Fancy one." "Black seal." She handed it over and leaned against the doorframe with the expression she wore when she already knew what was in something and was interested in the reaction. The letter was from the Malfoy estate. Not from Lucius, from Draco. Harry's age, his year at Hogwarts, the boy he'd met in Madame Malkin's the year before and found snobbish and impressed with himself, and whom he'd declined to be friends with in a way that had apparently been held against him all year. The letter was not what Harry expected. "Lord Potter, my father has instructed me not to contact you. I am writing because I believe he is approaching the current situation incorrectly and because I am 11 years old and nobody thinks 11-year-olds have political opinions, which makes this an ideal time to express one. You are going to win. The documentation will hold. My father knows it too, which is why he has 3 barristers. He is hoping to negotiate terms rather than fight, and he is preparing his negotiating position, but he doesn't know what you want, which puts him at a disadvantage. I don't know what you want either. But I know that the way my father is approaching this, treating you as a problem to be managed, is wrong. I watched you in the leaky cauldron corridor from the mezzanine. You walked past him like he wasn't a threat and he spent the next 20 minutes trying to figure out why that bothered him. I think it would be strategically useful to both of us if we spoke before the hearings." DM Harry read it 3 times. Tonks was watching him. "Well," she said. "His father doesn't know he sent this," Harry said. "Obviously. He's not wrong about anything in it." Harry turned the letter over. The seal on the back was the Malfoy crest, which meant Draco had used family stationery, which was either arrogance or a deliberate signal about legitimacy. Probably both. He's smart. Dangerous kind of smart or useful kind of smart. Harry thought about the letter. About the specific precision of it, not trying to be charming, not performing friendliness, just laying out a set of observations and a proposition. The same flatness Harry tended to prefer. A different upbringing, different values that were going to need to be interrogated, but the same underlying habit of mind that cut straight to what was true rather than dressing it up. "I don't know yet," Harry said. "I'll need to talk to him." "You're going to reply?" "I'm going to think about it." He set the letter in the folder with the other documents. "Not tonight." He went back to the 1612 charter and the penciled notes in the margin, and Tonks watched him for a moment and then left, pulling the door mostly closed, and the Edinburgh night came in through the window glass and Hedwig blinked slowly on her perch, and Harry read. At 10 o'clock, Amelia knocked. "There's something you should know before tomorrow," she said, coming in and sitting in the chair by the desk. She had her professional face on but it was sitting slightly differently than usual. Harry put down the charter. "Sirius Black," she said. "I opened the case review this afternoon. I pulled the original intake records from Azkaban." She set a parchment on the desk. "He has been in Azkaban for 11 years, and for 11 years he has been saying, in his intake interviews, that he did not betray your parents." She paused. "He's been saying he was framed. He's been saying Peter Pettigrew is alive." She looked at Harry. "Every single interview. The records go back to 1981. Every one." Harry looked at the parchment. "He never stopped," Amelia said quietly. "They write it down as a notation, prisoner in distressed state, claims innocence, claims alternate suspect, and it's filed and nobody acts on it because the intake process isn't connected to the review process and," she stopped. "He never stopped saying it. 11 years of interviews." The room was very quiet. "How fast can you get him out?" Harry asked. "I'm moving as fast as I legally can," Amelia said. "I need to establish a review board, collect the documentary evidence. The Gringotts notarization is strong but I need supporting." "How fast?" Harry said again. Not impatiently, specifically. Amelia met his eyes. 2 weeks. 3 if Fudge pushes back. Harry nodded. He looked at the Gringotts notarization document in his folder, the one that proved Peter Pettigrew had been the secret keeper. The one that had been sitting in a Gringotts records archive for 11 years while the man it exonerated sat in a cell saying the same true thing over and over to people whose job it was to write it down and do nothing with it. Does he know? Harry asked. That someone is looking? We haven't made contact, Amelia said. Standard procedure is no contact with the prisoner until the review is formally established. To avoid, can you make an exception? Amelia was quiet for a moment. What would you want me to tell him? Harry thought about his father's letter. About the line near the end, we are inconveniently difficult to finish, and about the kind of man who would write that in a will he hoped his son would never have to read. About the kind of man James Potter would have trusted enough to name as the first person who should have his son if everything went wrong. Tell him someone's coming, Harry said. Tell him he's not been forgotten. He looked at the document. Tell him we found the notarization. Amelia picked up her parchment and stood up. I'll see to it, she said. She left. Harry sat for a moment in the quiet, and then he turned back to the 1612 charter, and he read until midnight, and when he finally put the light out and lay back in the dark, the 4 rings on his hands were warm against his skin, and somewhere 300 miles south, in a cell that smelled of salt and despair, a man who had never stopped being innocent was waiting for something to change. Something was changing. Chapter 5, The trial. The review board convened in 10 days, not 2 weeks, because Amelia Bones decided that standard procedure was a guideline and the situation was not standard. She filed the motion on a Friday, got the board composition approved over the weekend by working through 3 different ministry subcommittees simultaneously, and had the documentary package delivered to all 7 board members by Monday morning. The package was 240 pages, organized by Clearwater into sections that built on each other with the logical inevitability of a mathematical proof, each section assuming the previous one as established fact and moving forward from there, so that by the time you reached the Gringotts notarization on page 187, it felt less like a revelation and more like a conclusion you'd already reached. Fudge pushed back on Tuesday. He sent a memo citing procedural complexity and recommending a standard timeline. Amelia sent back a memo citing the Unjust Imprisonment Act of 1888, which specified that any case involving evidence of wrongful conviction was to be prioritized above standard caseload. The memo also contained, in its final paragraph, a politely phrased note observing that the minister's intervention in an active DMLE review board proceeding would itself constitute a procedural irregularity that would need to be documented and reported. Fudge withdrew his objection on Wednesday morning. Harry read about this over breakfast in the Edinburgh safe house. In the daily briefing Clearwater had begun sending each morning, a single parchment, dense with information, organized chronologically. He read it the way he read everything now, fast and completely, and then he set it aside and finished his eggs. He's going to try something else, Harry said. Tonks looked up from her own breakfast. Fudge? He can't block the review board. So he'll try to influence the composition. Harry turned his water glass in his hand. Who's on the board? Amelia, across the table, had the names already. Griselda Marchbanks, retired. Tiberius Ogden, current Wisengamot member. Madame Longbottom by request. Augusta will be the problem for Fudge, Harry said. She's unimpeachable and she's motivated. He can't lean on her. He'll try Ogden, Amelia agreed. Ogden owes the minister several political favors. Then I want to speak to Ogden before the hearing, Harry said. Not to pressure him. I want him to hear the Gringotts notarization explained directly. Once he understands what it means legally, he won't need Fudge's version. He looked at Amelia. Can you arrange it? Today, she said. Tiberius Ogden was a wide, pink-faced man who had served on the Wisengamot for 22 years and had survived that tenure by being genuinely competent and strategically pleasant to everyone, which was a different skill from being likable. He agreed to meet Harry at his office in the ministry at 2 o'clock with the slightly wary graciousness of a man who was being asked to do something he wasn't sure about by someone he wasn't sure how to categorize. Harry sat across from him and explained the secret keeper switch without preamble. He showed him the Gringotts notarization. He showed him the Azkaban intake records, 11 years of interview notations, the same claim repeated in the same words across dozens of documents, documented and discarded each time with the bureaucratic efficiency of a system that had been designed to process prisoners rather than hear them. Ogden read the intake records. He read them for a long time. 12 years, he said. 11, Harry said. He went in November 1981. 11 years. Ogden set the records down. He looked at the notarization. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man doing a specific kind of arithmetic. The evidence of the secret keeper switch was available at the time of arrest. The Gringotts record was available, yes, Harry said. It wasn't requested. There was no trial in which it might have been entered. There was no trial at all, Ogden said. No. Ogden sat back. He had the look of a man who had spent 22 years navigating institutional politics and had just encountered something that was making the navigation feel very different than usual. Not smaller, larger. Uncomfortably larger. I'll support the review board proceedings, Ogden said. The evidence is, this is not a close question. If this notarization is authenticated, Gringotts has already authenticated it, Harry said. That's in the package Director Bones sent you. Then it's not a close question, Ogden said again. He looked at Harry steadily. I want you to understand that I had no knowledge of this. In 1981, I was aware that Sirius Black had been imprisoned. I was not aware there was no trial. He stopped. That should not have been possible. It was possible because nobody checked, Harry said, without heat. I'm not here to assign historical blame. I'm here because a man who didn't do what he was imprisoned for has been there for 11 years, and I want that fixed. He paused. Everything else can be addressed in order. Ogden looked at him. You're very measured, he said. For someone with as much reason as you have not to be. Anger doesn't get him out faster, Harry said simply. The review board hearing was set for Thursday. 2 days away. Harry spent Wednesday in the Edinburgh study with the full case documentation, reading it not as a participant but as a future witness, because Amelia had told him, the night before, that the board would almost certainly want to hear from him directly. Not legally required, his testimony wasn't evidence in the technical sense, but the board would want to hear from the person whose parents' murder was at the center of the case, and whose parents will name the man in question as primary guardian. He read until his eyes ached, and then Tonks knocked on the door and said that Neville was here, and he put the documents down. Neville had come with a jar of something from his greenhouse at Longbottom Manor, a small potted plant with silvery leaves that he held out when Harry opened the study door with the slightly self-conscious energy of someone not sure if bringing a plant was the right call. It's a Mimbulus Mimbletonia, Neville said. Well, a cutting. They're actually quite interesting magically, they have a defense mechanism anyway, I thought, he stopped. Gran said you were working hard. I thought, it doesn't need much attention. It's good for a study. Harry took the pot. The plant pulsed faintly, a small silver pulse like a heartbeat. He put it on the corner of the desk where the window light would reach it. Thanks, he said. Neville came in and looked at the stacked documents and the 1612 charter and the case files with the focused attention he'd been showing all week, that quiet, thorough way he had of taking things in. The hearing's tomorrow, he said. Thursday, Harry said. Yes. Neville sat in the armchair. Gran's preparing her statement. She's been at her desk since 6 this morning. He paused. She cried last night. When she read the intake records. He said it carefully, the way he said difficult things. She doesn't cry easily. No, said Harry. I don't think she does. She keeps saying she should have pushed harder in 1982. That she let herself be, she keeps using the word managed. He looked at the plant. I haven't seen her angry like this before. She's usually angry at things that are large and abstract. Institutions. This is specific. Specific is useful, Harry said. When the anger has something concrete to push against. Neville thought about this. Is that what you're doing? Giving the anger something concrete? Harry looked at the stack of case documents. I'm trying to, he said. If all of this is just feeling, it doesn't do anything. The documents do things. The legal mechanisms do things. He paused. The anger is fine. It's good fuel. But it can't be the engine. Neville was quiet for a moment. Sirius Black, he said. Your godfather. Technically, Harry said. I've never met him. Are you? Neville started, then seemed to reorganize the question. What do you think he's like? Harry thought about the intake records. About 11 years of the same words, the same claim, repeated to people whose job was to write it down and move on. I think he's someone who decided to keep saying the true thing even when nobody was listening to it, he said. That tells you something. Neville nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. It does. They sat for a while, which was comfortable in the specific way that sitting with someone is comfortable when you've both decided that silence doesn't need to be filled. Hedwig moved on her perch and blinked at Neville, and Neville, who knew about magical creatures, blinked back in a way that apparently satisfied her, because she resettled her feathers and closed her eyes again. I'll be there tomorrow, Neville said. At the hearing. Gran's going anyway, and I want to be there. Okay, Harry said. I don't have to do anything, right? I want to be in the room. You don't have to do anything, Harry said. Being in the room is enough. Thursday arrived cold for summer, a grey-skied morning that came in through the windows with the particular English stubbornness of weather that had decided on a mood. Harry was up at 5:30. He dressed in his formal robes without thinking much about it, the movements becoming familiar now, the weight of the rings on his hands something he'd stopped noticing in the way you stop noticing things that belong to you. Amelia was already at the table with coffee and the look of someone who had not slept much and had done useful things with the time instead. She pushed a coffee toward him. Dumbledore filed an objection last night, she said. Harry sat down. To the review board? To the composition. He's citing conflict of interest, arguing that Augusta Longbottom's personal history with the Lestrange case creates an appearance of bias. She slid the parchment across. It was filed at 11:58 p.m. Harry read it. It was well constructed, it didn't try to block the hearing, it just questioned the board's impartiality, which was a different kind of move. A move designed to undermine whatever the board concluded rather than prevent it from concluding anything. He's not trying to stop the hearing, Harry said. He's trying to make the outcome contestable. Yes, Amelia said. Which means he already knows what the outcome is going to be. Harry put the parchment down. He's building his exit position. The objection won't be sustained, Amelia said. Augusta's connection to the Lestrange case is historical, not current. She has no stake in Black's release or imprisonment in any legal sense. The conflict of interest claim doesn't hold. She picked up her coffee. But it'll be heard this morning before proceedings begin, which adds time. He wants us to feel the delay, Harry said. He wants the morning to start on his terms. He drank his coffee. Okay. We go early. We're already seated when the objection is heard. Courtroom 10 opens at 7:30 for review board proceedings. Then we leave at 7, said Harry. The courtroom was different in review board configuration, the full Wisengamot seating was closed off, the chamber arranged more intimately, the 3 board members at a single long desk at the front and the witness and evidentiary space before them in an open semicircle. Amelia had told him it was less formal than a full session and more formal than a department hearing, which put it somewhere in a middle register that felt appropriate for what it was, a serious inquiry into a serious injustice that should have been a serious inquiry 11 years ago. Harry and Amelia arrived at 7:20. Neville and Augusta were already there. Augusta had clearly arrived at 7:15, because the seat she occupied had the air of a seat that had been chosen strategically, positioned so that she could see both the board desk and the door simultaneously. Neville sat beside her, in formal robes that fit better than his usual ones, with the serious attention he brought to everything. By 8 o'clock, the witness gallery was fuller than Harry had expected. Ogden and Marchbanks were at the board desk, reviewing documentation. Augusta settled into her board seat with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this since she read the intake records. Clearwater was at the legal representative's desk with 4 organized folders in front of her. Several Wisengamot members who had no formal role in the proceedings had found reasons to be present. Harry recognized 3 of them from the session earlier in the week. And in the back row, alone, in robes that were navy rather than his usual midnight blue, sat Albus Dumbledore. He had come. Harry had not expected that. He'd expected the objection to be submitted formally and attended by a legal representative, not the man himself. Dumbledore's presence in the back row of a review board hearing he tried to delay was a statement. Harry wasn't sure yet of exactly what, but it was definitely a statement. He met Dumbledore's eyes briefly when he came in. Dumbledore looked back with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable, and Harry held it for 3 seconds and then looked at the board desk and sat down. The objection was heard first, as Amelia had predicted. The board's legal moderator, a thin, dry-voiced wizard named Perkins who looked like he'd been making procedural rulings for so long he'd begun to take on their qualities, read Dumbledore's filing aloud, summarized the argument, and then looked at Augusta over his notes. "Madam Longbottom," said Perkins. "Do you wish to respond to the conflict of interest claim?" Augusta straightened marginally, which on Augusta was the equivalent of most people standing at full attention. "I wish to note," she said, in the voice she used for statements that were going to be extremely clear, "that I have no personal legal interest in the outcome of this review. The Lestrange trials were concluded in 1982. My son and his wife remain in St. Mungo's. Neither Black's guilt nor his innocence changes that fact." She paused. "What I have is an interest in the truth. If that disqualifies me, I would suggest that disqualification should apply to every member of any judicial body in Britain." Perkins made a note. "The objection is overruled," he said. "Proceedings will commence." In the back row, Dumbledore did not react. He simply watched. The first 2 hours were documentary. Clearwater walked the board through the evidence package section by section, placing each piece into the record with the precise efficiency she'd brought to everything for the past week. The Gringotts notarization went in on page 187 as expected, and when Marchbanks read it, really read it, leaning forward with her glasses on the end of her nose, she sat back and said nothing for almost 30 seconds. "The secret keeper switch," she said finally. "This was filed with Gringotts on October 19, 1981. "Yes," Clearwater confirmed. 12 days before the murders. "Yes." "And Peter Pettigrew was confirmed dead. He was reported dead," Clearwater said. "No body was recovered. The killing curse was attributed to Black based on eyewitness testimony from 3 surviving Muggles who saw the explosion, none of whom had the ability to identify the caster." She turned to the next section. "The explosion itself, a street crater 12 feet wide, was consistent with a blasting curse, not the killing curse. The killing curse produces no concussive force." Ogden leaned forward. "The original Aura report, does it specify the curse?" "It does not," said Clearwater. "It records an explosion and the discovery of the alleged victim's finger." She placed the document in front of the board. "One finger. No other remains recovered." Augusta's expression, through all of this, was the expression of someone who was listening with absolute precision and feeling something with absolute precision and keeping both entirely separate from each other. Harry watched. He was not in the witness position yet. Amelia had told him he'd be called after the documentary phase, and he sat in his chair with his hands folded on the table, and he watched the board, and he watched the evidence, and once he looked back at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was watching him. Not the evidence, Harry. And in Dumbledore's eyes, behind the familiar warmth and intelligence, was something that Harry had not seen there before. Not guilt, exactly, though it was in that direction. More like the specific discomfort of a man who had spent 70 years being the person who understood things before other people understood them, and was now sitting in a room watching events unfold that he had not fully predicted and could not fully redirect. Harry looked back at the board. He was called at 10:30. He walked to the witness position, a simple chair facing the board desk, and sat in it the way he sat in everything, like he'd decided to be there. Marchbanks spoke first. Lord Potter. Thank you for appearing before this board. I want to begin by acknowledging that the subject of this review is personally connected to you in ways that are extraordinary. You don't have to be here. I know, said Harry. I want to be. We'll be asking you about your discovery of the evidence, she said. The notarization document. How you came to know about it and what your understanding of it is. Of course, said Harry. She started with the straightforward questions, when he'd first learned about the inheritance documentation, how Gringotts had presented the notarization, what the process of the inheritance ritual had revealed. Harry answered each one directly, without elaboration he hadn't been asked for, without the temptation to make his answers more dramatic than the facts required. The facts were dramatic enough without help. Then Ogden asked the question that mattered. Lord Potter, he said, with the careful courtesy of a man who had decided where his conscience was pointing and had decided to follow it. You've had access to a significant body of documentation in the past 10 days. In your reading of that documentation, and I understand you've read extensively, is there anything in the record that suggests Sirius Black's guilt was ever a matter of established evidence, as opposed to assumption? The room was very quiet. No, Harry said. There isn't. Can you elaborate? The evidence of guilt was entirely circumstantial and was never tested, Harry said. He was the obvious suspect because he was my father's best friend and secret keeper, but we know from the notarization that he transferred the secret keeper role to Pettigrew. He was present on the street when Pettigrew was killed, but there's no forensic evidence identifying him as the caster of the explosion, and one recovered finger is not a body. He paused. What actually happened, as far as the documentary record allows me to reconstruct, is that Sirius Black pursued Peter Pettigrew after the murders. Pettigrew created the explosion that killed 12 Muggles and staged his own death, and Sirius Black was found at the scene by Aurors who had already decided what they were looking at. He said this without raising his voice. Not accusatory, factual. The same voice he used for everything. Nobody checked the alternative, he said. Nobody looked for the notarization. Nobody questioned whether the obvious answer was the right answer. He looked at the board. If they had, he would have been acquitted immediately, because the evidence for his guilt was never strong enough to overcome the evidence of the secret keeper switch. Augusta was writing something. Her hand was steady but she was pressing slightly harder than necessary. And in your opinion, Marchbanks said carefully, what does the absence of a trial represent? Harry thought about the answer. He thought about framing it as a question of legal irregularity, of institutional failure, of procedural collapse. He thought about all the measured, architectural ways to describe it. It represents, he said, someone deciding that the outcome was already known, and that the process was inconvenient. He kept his voice level. That's not justice. It's efficiency. And it cost my godfather 11 years. The board called a recess at noon. Harry stepped out into the corridor and Neville was there immediately, not crowding him, just present, which was something Harry was coming to understand was Neville's particular form of support. He stood near things he cared about. He was reliable in the way that things you could stand next to were reliable. That was good, Neville said. It was true, Harry said. I just said what was true. Sometimes that's the hard part, Neville said. Harry leaned against the corridor wall. The formal posture of the morning could have a moment off. How did your grandmother look? Like she's going to do something extremely thorough, Neville said. She had that expression. Good, said Harry. Tonks materialized from somewhere. She had a gift for appearing when she was needed, and pressed a sandwich into Harry's hand without ceremony. Eat, she said. You haven't since breakfast. He ate. It was a good sandwich. Someone had put mustard on it, which was the right call. Dumbledore came out of the courtroom at 12:15, and he did not look at Harry immediately. He looked at the corridor wall, the ceiling, the small window at the far end, in the way that people looked at things when they were organizing their thoughts. Then he walked toward where Harry was standing. Harry straightened. Dumbledore stopped a few feet away. Up close, he looked, not old, because Dumbledore had always looked old in a way that didn't suggest frailty, but tired, in a new way. The tiredness of someone who had been carrying a structure and could feel the weight of it changing. Your testimony was compelling, he said. It was accurate, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him. I want to explain something to you. Not as a defense. As context. I'm listening, Harry said, because he'd always intended to. In November 1981, Dumbledore said, Voldemort had fallen, but we did not know he was gone permanently. I had reason to believe, that he would return. Everything I did in those days was oriented around that event. Around making sure that when he returned, we would be ready. He paused. I placed you with your aunt because the blood wards were the strongest protection I knew. I administered the estate because there was no one else with the authority and the knowledge to do it without risk. He stopped. I made decisions that were not mine to make. I know that. Harry looked at him. You decided, Harry said, that your understanding of the situation was more important than my parents' wishes. Yes, Dumbledore said. I did. And Sirius Black. A pause. I believed he was guilty, Dumbledore said. I had reasons to believe it. I was wrong. He said the last two words with a weight that was not performative. They cost him something to say, which meant they were real. You were wrong, Harry said. And because you were wrong, and because there was no trial to correct it, he's been in Azkaban for 11 years. He let that sit. You said you had reasons to believe he was guilty. The secret keeper notarization was filed with Gringotts. It was accessible to anyone with the clearance and the will to look for it. He paused. Did you look? A longer silence. No, said Dumbledore. I did not look. Why not? Dumbledore looked at him. Because I was certain. The corridor was very quiet. I'm not certain of things, Harry said. I check. When I'm reading something and it tells me what I expect it to, I look for what would change that. Because being certain is easy and being right is harder. He paused. I'm 11. I learned that from a folder of legal documents in 3 days. You've had 70 years. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't performed. It was just what was true, said in the same level voice he'd used for everything. Dumbledore stood very still. When Sirius gets out, Harry said, I want to meet him. I want to do that without what's happened becoming the first thing between us. I'm asking you to make that possible. I'm asking you not to intervene in the review board's process, and not to make his release a political question. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Can you do that? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes. I can do that. Thank you, said Harry. He picked up the second half of his sandwich. I'll see you in there. The afternoon session was shorter. The board had heard the evidence. Augusta gave her statement, 4 pages, precise, devastating in its specificity, written in the hand of a woman who had spent a night turning grief into language that a legal record could hold. She read it without her voice changing, which was one of the bravest things Harry had seen. Marchbanks asked 2 follow-up questions. Ogden asked 1. The moderator, Perkins, collected the final documentation and announced that the board would deliberate and produce a ruling within 48 hours. They were done by 3 o'clock. In the corridor afterward, Clearwater was compiling notes with the industrious calm of someone who had done everything they came to do and was satisfied with how it had gone. Amelia spoke quietly with Ogden. Neville stood near Augusta, not touching her, just present in the way he was present for things he cared about. Tonks fell into step beside Harry as they walked toward the lifts. "How do you feel?" she asked. Harry thought about it honestly. "Tired," he said. "But, okay. I think it went well." "It went very well," Tonks said. "You know that, right? Not just procedurally." "You were," she stopped, because Tonks was many things, including occasionally precise about feelings in a way that surprised people. "You were what was needed," she said. "In that room." Harry nodded. He appreciated her not making it bigger than it was. "Serious," he said. "If the ruling comes back in 48 hours, Amelia will file for emergency release within the hour," Tonks said. "She's already drafted it. She just needs the board's ruling as the attached instrument." "And after release?" Harry looked at the lift doors. "He'll need somewhere to go. He'll need people." "You're thinking about that already?" Tonks said. "I've been thinking about it since Monday," Harry said. The lift arrived. They got in. "Grimmauld Place," Tonks said quietly. "The Black family house. It's technically his. It's been empty." She paused. "It'll need cleaning. The house has been, it's not been maintained, and there are certain items in it that are," she stopped. "There's a portrait of his mother that's apparently quite vocal. But it's his. He shouldn't have to go back there alone," Harry said. Tonks looked at him sideways. "You're planning to be there?" "He's my godfather," Harry said. "He doesn't know me. I don't know him." He paused. "That seems like a place to start." The ruling came in 36 hours, not 48, because Griselda Marchbanks had apparently finished deliberating by midnight on the first day and had spent the rest of the time waiting for the appropriate procedural window to release the finding without it looking rushed. She was a woman who understood timing. The ruling was 3 paragraphs. The first established the evidentiary basis for wrongful imprisonment. The second formally vacated the Azkaban order. The third recommended, with the careful language of a board that knew its recommendations carried weight, a full inquiry into the circumstances of the original arrest and the absence of trial proceedings. Amelia filed the emergency release instrument within 45 minutes of receiving the ruling. She filed it to the Azkaban warden's office and to the Ministry of Magic simultaneously, which meant Fudge got the paperwork at the same moment as the prison, which meant there was no window for a political intervention. Harry was in the Edinburgh study when the confirmation owl arrived, a large, serious bird from the ministry's administrative wing, bearing a document stamped with 3 separate official seals. He read it once, put it on the desk next to the Mimbulus Mimbletonia cutting, and sat back in his chair. Sirius Black would be released by morning. He thought about the letter from his father. About "we are inconveniently difficult to finish." About the man who'd written that sentence in a will he hoped his son would never have to read, and the man he'd named first, ahead of everyone else, as the person who should have his son if everything went wrong. Everything had gone wrong. And it had taken 11 years and 9 Aurors and a Gringotts inheritance ritual and 2 weeks of reading that made his eyes ache. But it was fixed. Harry got up and went downstairs, and the house was quiet in the particular way of a place where several people were each in their own rooms doing their own thinking, and he went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, and after a few minutes Tonks wandered in with her hair its natural color and the relaxed expression she wore in the evenings, and then Amelia, and then Kingsley, who'd come back from the ministry with the secondary documentation. They had tea. Nobody said very much. The kettle was loud in the quiet house and Hedwig called once from somewhere upstairs and then went silent. "Tomorrow," Harry said, after a while. "Tomorrow," Amelia confirmed. Harry wrapped his hands around the mug. The rings were warm. The house was warm. Outside, Edinburgh was doing its Edinburgh thing, rain starting up, the soft percussion of it on the windows, and somewhere far south, in a cell that smelled of salt and years, a man who had kept saying the true thing until someone listened was going to go to sleep for the last time in that particular darkness. Harry drank his tea. He thought about Hogwarts in September, about Susan and Neville and Luna, about the Wisengamot hearing still scheduled, about the property motions and Lucius Malfoy's 3 barristers and the Draco letter he still hadn't replied to and the interview with the Quibbler next week. He thought about the governance seats and Dumbledore's exit position and the 1,000 things the next month would bring. And then he stopped thinking about all of it, because tomorrow was one thing at a time and the one thing tomorrow was the most important of all of them. Sirius. He put his mug down and went back upstairs and stood at the window in the study and watched the Edinburgh rain come down on a city that didn't know anything about any of this, and felt, in the quiet and the warmth and the afterweight of the hardest and most important day of his life so far, something he recognized with some difficulty because it was unfamiliar. He felt, carefully and completely, like things were going to be all right. Not all at once. Not without more work. Not without the hearings and the motions and whatever Dumbledore was going to do next and whatever the rest of the wizarding world was going to make of the boy who had walked into Gringotts and walked out wearing 11 houses on his hands. But all right. He went to bed. In the morning, Sirius Black walked out of Azkaban into the grey Atlantic light, blinking at a sky he hadn't seen in 11 years, and Amelia Bones was there on the dock with a cloak and a ministry port-key and the steady, direct manner of a woman who had something to say and was going to say it clearly. She said, "It's over. The ruling is final. You're free." Sirius Black looked at her. He was thin in the way that years in a place like that made a person thin, and his eyes had the quality of something that had been through a great deal and was still, impossibly, present, still recognizably themselves, still looking out from behind everything that had happened to them with the particular stubbornness of a man who had decided, 11 years ago on a cold November street, that he was going to keep saying the true thing regardless. He said, "Is Harry, he's safe," Amelia said. "He's waiting." Sirius Black took the port-key. Chapter 6, Lord of 11. Sirius Black arrived in the Edinburgh safe-house kitchen at 7:43 in the morning, via port-key, which deposited him in the middle of the floor with the usual graceless lurch of ministry travel and absolutely none of the usual complaint about it from the traveler, because Sirius Black had just spent 11 years in Azkaban and a ministry port-key landing on a clean kitchen floor was, comparatively, a luxury. He caught himself on the counter. Straightened. Looked around. The kitchen was warm. There was a kettle going. Sunlight was coming through the window at a low morning angle and doing something pleasant with the steam from the kettle, and the whole room had the quality of somewhere that people actually lived in, which was, it had been a while since Sirius had been in a room with that quality. Harry was at the table. He'd been there since 6:30, because he'd woken at 6 and found that additional sleep was not something his body was willing to participate in. He'd made tea and sat down and thought about what you said to a person you'd never met but who was, legally and by the specific choosing of 2 people who'd loved them both, family. He hadn't come up with anything definitive. So he just sat with his tea and waited. Sirius looked at him. Harry looked back. Sirius was thinner than the photographs. Harry had found a picture in the Gringotts family file, James Potter and Sirius Black at what looked like a Hogwarts Quidditch celebration, both of them grinning with the complete commitment of people who had just won something and intended to celebrate it for a significant amount of time. The man in the photograph was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, handsome in a careless way that suggested he'd never put much thought into it. The man standing in the kitchen had the same bones, the same dark hair, though it was longer and less cared for now, and the same eyes, grey, clear, and currently doing the same thing Harry's eyes tended to do in high-stakes moments, which was measure. He measured Harry for a long moment. Then he said, "You have Lily's eyes." "Everyone says that," Harry said. "Everyone's right." Sirius's voice was rougher than the voice in Harry's imagination, which made sense. 11 years of limited use tended to do that. "You also have James's face. His hair. He stopped. Something moved through his expression that had no clean name, something that was grief and pride in 11 years of missing and something else, the particular pain of seeing someone you've loved in the face of someone you're only just meeting. "God," he said quietly. "You're so like him." "I'm told," Harry said. "It's not a complaint." Sirius looked around the kitchen again, orienting. Is this your place?" "Safe house." Amelia Bones arranged it. Harry stood up and got another mug from the cupboard. "Tea?" Sirius looked at the mug. At the ordinary, domestic normalcy of being offered tea in a kitchen. "Yeah," he said. "Tea would be, yes." Harry poured it and set it on the table and sat back down. Sirius came and sat across from him, the movement slightly careful in the way of someone relearning the physical relationship between their body and the world, and wrapped both hands around the mug the way Harry wrapped both hands around his. The similarity was small and unnoticed by either of them, which made it more real. They sat. "I didn't know about you," Harry said. "Growing up." "They didn't, the Dursleys didn't tell me anything about my family." Sirius looked at him. "Nothing?" "Nothing useful. They told me my parents died in a car crash." He said it without drama, because it was just a fact now, one of many he'd collected and filed. "I found out about the wizarding world when I got my Hogwarts letter." Sirius put his mug down. He put it down carefully, which told Harry something about how he was managing things. "A car crash," he said. "Yes. 10 years. 11, by now," Harry said. Sirius was quiet. His jaw was doing something controlled. Harry waited. "I wanted to come for you," Sirius said. "From Azkaban, I thought about it, he stopped. "It wasn't possible. And I wasn't," he looked at his hands. "The Dementors. They take things. They take the warmth of things, the good memories, and what they leave. It's hard to think clearly. For a long time it was hard to think clearly." "I know what they do," Harry said. "I read about them." "What kept me?" Sirius stopped again. Started again. "I knew I was innocent. That was the thing. When everything else went, the warmth went, the memories of good things went, the fact of my innocence stayed. It's not a happy thought. It's not the kind of thing Dementors take." He looked up. "I held on to it." "I know," Harry said. "Amelia showed me the intake records. Every interview." Sirius looked at him. "Every single one," Harry said. 11 years of the same words. You never stopped." Something happened in Sirius's face that was not a small thing. It was the particular movement of a person being told that the thing they did when nobody was watching was seen, eventually, by someone who was specifically looking. He pressed his mouth together for a moment and looked at the table. "Someone had to," he said, when he could say it. "Yes," Harry said. "Someone did." They sat with that for a moment, and the kettle on the stove was quiet now, and the morning was doing its low-angled thing with the light, and it was, Harry thought, a good room to have a conversation that mattered in. "I want to know about them," Harry said. "My parents. Not the public versions, not the war hero versions. I want to know what they were like." He looked at Sirius steadily. You knew them better than anyone. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in his posture changed, the careful management of it relaxed by degrees, the way something relaxes when it's been held tightly for a very long time and is finally being set down in a place that's safe to put it. Your father, he said, was the most infuriating person I ever met, and I loved him more than anyone I've ever known. He picked up his tea. He cheated at exploding snap. Consistently. Without remorse. How do you cheat at exploding snap? Harry said. Nobody knows, Sirius said. That was the truly impressive part. Amelia left them alone until 9, which was longer than the DMLE protocol for newly released prisoners technically permitted, but she'd decided 3 days ago that the DMLE protocol was going to be interpreted with considerable flexibility in this particular case. She spent the time in the front sitting room with Kingsley and a set of documents she needed to review, and she listened to the sound of conversation from the kitchen, low, occasionally punctuated by something that sounded like a story being told, occasionally by something that might have been a laugh, Sirius's rough and slightly surprised, like a mechanism that hadn't been used in a while and was finding its way back, and she drank her coffee and read her documents and kept her professional expression firmly in place. Kingsley, across from her, was doing the same thing. They didn't discuss it. At 9 o'clock she went in and told Sirius that there were medical and legal requirements to process, and he accepted this with the cooperative patience of someone who understood that paperwork was now the specific shape his freedom needed to take. He looked better than he had when he'd arrived, not physically, that would take weeks, food and sleep and the gradual re-entry of warmth into things, but differently. Less careful. Like something had been slightly unlocked. He looked at Harry when he stood up from the table, and Harry looked back, and neither of them said anything in particular, but the quality of the silence had changed from the silence of strangers to the silence of people who had more to say and had decided they had time to say it. The Wisengamot property hearings began the following week. Harry was there for both of them, in his formal robes, with Clearwater at his shoulder and Augusta in the gallery and the documentation organized into a presentation that Clearwater had described as comprehensive, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had built something they were proud of. The property transfer hearings were more technical than dramatic, a precise legal unraveling of 11 years of administrative maneuvering, conducted in the measured language of property law that made it sound dry and was, underneath the dryness, explosive. Lucius Malfoy's 3 barristers were good. Harry had expected that. They attacked the chain of title documentation with technical precision, finding 3 genuine ambiguities in the 1982 transfer records and building arguments around each one with the focused professionalism of people who were being paid to find the hairline cracks and widen them. Clearwater was better. She had anticipated every argument, Harry had suspected she would, because he'd seen her preparing at midnight and at 5 in the morning and at the table during lunches she ate while reviewing documents, and she had, for each ambiguity, a responsive document that the barristers hadn't anticipated. The most important of these was a secondary Gringotts record, produced by Ragnarok, that showed the Administrative Estate Office's authorization for the property transfers had been signed with an authority code that had expired 14 days before the transfers were processed. The transfers were, in the technical language of the hearing officer, void for lack of authorization. The properties reverted to the Potter estate. Lucius Malfoy received this information with the expression of a man who had known it was coming and had decided in advance to receive it with absolute composure. He succeeded, which Harry noted. A composed defeat was a different kind of information than an emotional one. After the hearing, in the corridor outside, Malfoy stopped Harry with the precise timing of someone who had choreographed the stop. Not blocking, simply present, at the right angle and distance for a private conversation. Lord Potter, he said. Lord Malfoy, said Harry. The outcome of the hearing is clear. Malfoy said it without preamble, which Harry respected. I'm not going to contest the property reversions. The authorization code issue is conclusive. I know, Harry said. What I'd like to discuss, Malfoy said carefully, is the question of the financial records. The transfer payments made by the Malfoy estate to the administrative office during the property acquisition. He paused. I want to put on record, before those records become part of a broader inquiry, that the Malfoy estate entered those transactions in good faith, relying on the authority representation of the administrative office. Harry looked at him. You're saying you didn't know the authorization was void? I'm saying the Malfoy estate relied on representations made by the Chief Warlock's office and had no independent means of verifying their accuracy. Malfoy held his gaze. Which is true? Harry thought about this. He thought about Draco's letter, still in his folder, unanswered. About the intelligence in it, the blunt, clear-eyed assessment of a boy who had seen his father's position and identified its weakness before his father had. The financial records will be part of the administrative inquiry, Harry said. That's not something I control, it's a natural consequence of the property hearing findings. But the inquiry's scope is the Chief Warlock's office, not the parties who transacted with it. He paused. If the Malfoy estate's records show good faith reliance on authorized representations, that's what they show. Malfoy absorbed this. You're not pursuing the Malfoy estate. I'm pursuing the administrative irregularities, Harry said. The properties are returned. The record shows how they were transferred improperly. Where the money went from the administrative office after the Malfoy estate paid it, that's a different question, and it's not my primary concern. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. My son wrote to you, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said. He did it without my knowledge. I assumed that, Harry said. The letter was intelligent. Something moved in Malfoy's expression. Not quite pride, something adjacent to it, cautious, the pride of a man who didn't want to be caught having it. He is, Malfoy said. Intelligent. I know, said Harry. I intend to write back. He nodded to Malfoy and walked on, and Kingsley fell into step beside him, and after a moment Kingsley said, very quietly, that was diplomatically executed. Malfoy's more useful outside the inquiry than inside it, Harry said. If his estate cooperates with documentation requests, the administrative records come out faster than if he fights every subpoena. He paused. And Draco shouldn't inherit a war. Kingsley didn't say anything to that. He just walked. The letter to Draco took Harry an evening to write, because he wrote 4 versions and discarded 3 of them. The first version was too formal. The second was too friendly in a way that felt performed. The third was too strategic, which was honest but would read as cold. The fourth was what he actually wanted to say, which was the version he sent. Draco, you were right about most of it. The documentation held. Your father handled it with more grace than I expected, which I think reflects better on him than his initial position. I'm not interested in making the Malfoy family into an enemy. I'm not interested in most of the things people seem to expect me to be interested in. What I'm interested in is getting the record straight and then using the position I'm apparently in to do things that are worth doing. I don't know you. You don't know me. We've made some poor first impressions on each other. I'd like to start over. Hogwarts in September. If you want to talk properly, actually talk, not position, find me. Harry. He sealed it and gave it to Hedwig, who took it with the professional confidence of an owl who considered every delivery within her capability. She was back before midnight, which meant Draco had been waiting for the reply. The response was 3 lines. September. I'll find you. I should tell you, I was sorted into Slytherin because I wanted to be. Not because of family pressure. I think you should know that before we meet, so you can factor in whatever you've decided about Slytherins. Harry put it in the folder and went to sleep. Sirius moved into Grimmauld Place 2 weeks after his release, with help from Tonks, who was his cousin and who had appeared the day after his release with the particular energy of someone who had been wanting to do this for a long time and was making up for the wait. She'd brought food, cleaning supplies, and a very specific approach to the portrait of Walburga Black that involved a silencing charm applied directly to the frame, which was temporary but which Sirius described as the most therapeutic thing he'd witnessed in recent memory. Harry came on a Saturday with Neville and Susan, because he'd decided that Sirius needed people and that the particular people he needed were ones who would treat him like a person rather than like someone they had opinions about. Susan brought a plant from her garden. Neville brought a plant from his greenhouse. Harry brought food, because he'd asked Sirius in the week before what he wanted and Sirius had said, with absolute sincerity, that he wanted a proper Sunday roast, which turned out to be an achievable thing if you had a Muggle shopping street 2 blocks from the Portkey arrival point and a basic competence with an oven. The 4 of them were in the Grimmauld Place kitchen at noon, which smelled of cooking and was warmer than the rest of the house, which was still in the process of being reclaimed from 11 years of emptiness. Creature, the house elf, had appeared and disappeared at intervals with the sulking, resentful energy of a creature who had strong opinions about the changes being made to his domain and was expressing them through a series of escalating mutters that Sirius was ignoring with practiced determination. Susan and Sirius had taken to each other immediately, which Harry could have predicted because Susan had the gift of treating people the way they needed to be treated rather than the way the situation suggested, and what Sirius needed was to be treated normally. She asked him questions about Hogwarts, about what the castle was like when he'd been a student, about the Marauders, about Quidditch, and Sirius answered with the gradual unlocking of someone who had not had an ordinary conversation in a very long time and was finding that he remembered how. Neville was quieter, but Sirius had noticed something about Neville early, that his quietness was attentive, not absent, that he listened and remembered, and this was something Sirius responded to. By the time the roast was done, Sirius had told Neville 3 stories about James Potter that Harry suspected he hadn't told anyone in years, and Neville had listened to all of them with the focused care he brought to things that mattered. Harry moved around the kitchen with the quiet comfort of someone who'd spent enough of the last 3 weeks cooking in a safe house kitchen that domestic competence had snuck up on him, and Sirius watched him from the table and said, halfway through the afternoon, "You cooked for the Dursleys, didn't you?" "Every morning," Harry said, without looking up from the gravy. "And dinner?" Sirius was quiet. "I'm going to be very careful," he said, "about how I talk about that, because I can tell that you don't want it to be a big thing." Harry looked up. "It's not a big thing anymore," he said. "It's just where I was before here." Sirius nodded. He picked up his glass. "Your father," he said, "couldn't cook to save his life. Literally. He once made toast so badly that Dumbledore's phoenix came to the window. We still don't know why." "That can't be true," Susan said. "I have witnesses," Sirius said. 3 of them, all of whom are unfortunately no longer with us, so you'll have to take my word for it." Susan started laughing. Neville made the strangled sound of someone trying not to. Harry turned back to the gravy, and his shoulders were doing something that might have been a smile if anyone could have seen his face, which nobody could, and that was fine. The Quibbler interview ran on a Tuesday. Xenophilius Lovegood was exactly what his letter had suggested he would be, enthusiastic, tangential, possessed of a deep conviction in things Harry had not previously considered, and underneath all of it, sharply intelligent about the things that mattered. He'd brought Luna, who sat in the corner of the Grimmauld Place sitting room they'd used for the interview and read a book, and occasionally, when her father's questions went in directions that were more nargles than relevant, looked up and said something quiet and precise that redirected him. Harry answered the questions he wanted to answer and deflected the ones he didn't with the straightforward clarity that Xenophilius received better than most interviewers would have, because the Quibbler, as Luna had said, didn't have the Prophet's editors, and also didn't have the Prophet's investment in particular narratives. "What do you want people to understand?" Xenophilius asked, toward the end, "about what's happened in the last 3 weeks?" Harry thought about the question honestly. "That the system worked," he said. "Eventually. Which means it can work. The problem wasn't that the mechanisms didn't exist, the inheritance laws, the review board processes, the Wisengamot seat procedures. They all existed. They just weren't used. For 11 years, the right questions weren't asked, the right documents weren't requested, the right processes weren't started. He paused. I want people to understand that it doesn't require extraordinary circumstances to make things right. It requires someone deciding to actually use the mechanisms that are there. And the people who prevented those mechanisms from functioning? Xenophilius asked, with the directness of a man who published what he believed regardless of who it inconvenienced. The administrative inquiry will address that, Harry said. That's what inquiries are for. He looked at Xenophilius steadily. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in the record being accurate. Luna looked up from her book. That's the part people will have trouble believing, she said. Not the inheritance, the 11 houses, people will believe that because it's in the documents. The part they'll struggle with is that you actually mean it. About the record. About not wanting revenge. Do you believe it? Harry asked her. Luna considered with the seriousness she brought to genuine questions. Yes, she said. Because revenge requires you to keep looking backward. You're not looking backward. No, Harry said. I'm not. The interview ran 4 pages in the following week's Quibbler, under the headline The Boy Who Lived Speaks, Lord Potter on Inheritance, Justice, and the Mechanisms of Truth. It was, as Xenophilius had promised, written accurately. It covered the inheritance, the Azkaban release, the property hearings, and included a long sidebar about Nargles that Harry had agreed to because Xenophilius had asked earnestly and it cost him nothing. The Prophet ran a response piece that was largely dismissive of the Quibbler as a source, which had the effect of making everyone who read both publications do so with greater attention, and the net result was that more people read Harry's actual words, in his actual voice, than would have if the Prophet had simply reprinted them. Luna, when Harry mentioned this, nodded in the manner of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. The administrative inquiry into the Chief Warlock's estate management office opened at the end of August. Harry did not attend every session. He attended the first one, to file his formal complainant statement, and he answered the documentary subpoenas as they came in, and he let Clearwater do the work she'd been doing brilliantly for 3 weeks. He had made his decision early, that his role was to start the mechanism and then let it run, and that showing up to every session would look like the revenge Luna had correctly identified he wasn't interested in. He was at Grimmauld Place on the day the inquiry issued its preliminary findings, with Sirius, who was looking considerably better, the gauntness was filling out, the rough voice was smoothing, and the eyes, which had always been present and clear, were now present and clear in a way that had warmth in it, the warmth coming back by degrees like a house being reheated room by room. They were in the kitchen again, which had become the default room because it was warm and comfortable and because Creature had given up sulking in it and now simply existed in it with the resigned acceptance of an elf who had recalculated his position. Sirius was teaching Harry Exploding Snap, specifically the method James Potter had used to cheat at it, which turned out to involve a minor technical manipulation of the shuffling process that Sirius demonstrated 3 times before Harry identified the mechanism. That's not cheating, Harry said. That's a card technique. Your father called it a card technique too, Sirius said. It's cheating. He just had a gift for renaming things. Harry performed the technique. The card deck detonated slightly earlier than intended, singing his left thumb. He looked at the small scorch mark with an expression of neutral assessment. I need more practice. James said that every time too, Sirius said. For about 4 years. Then he stopped practicing and started cheating competently, which is a different skill. The Grimmauld Place fireplace flared green and Amelia stepped out with the inquiry findings document, which was 40 pages and which she set on the table between them with the expression of someone who had read it already and had organized her feelings about it. Harry picked it up. He read the first page, which contained the executive summary, and then he put it down. The governance seats, he said. Improperly administered from the date of original assumption, Amelia said. The authorization gap is confirmed, the emergency powers lapsed in February 1982 and the estate administration continued without legal basis. Every vote cast with those seats after that date is flagged for review. How many votes? The flagged list is Appendix C, Amelia said. It's long. Sirius looked at the document. What does that mean practically? For Dumbledore? It means a series of governance actions taken over 11 years are subject to challenge, Amelia said. Staff appointments, curriculum decisions, budget allocations, Wisengamot resolutions that required those votes to pass. She paused. Not all of them will be reversed. The review board will determine which outcomes would have been different without those votes. But the inquiry's findings make Dumbledore's administrative position, particularly as headmaster, subject to a confidence review by the Hogwarts Board of Governors. His own governors, Harry said. The same governors whose appointment, in several cases, was influenced by votes cast from improperly administered seats, Amelia said. The inquiry notes this circularity. Harry looked at the document. He thought about what he actually wanted from this. He thought about Hogwarts in September, 4 weeks away now, and about the school that had been the first place that felt like something, even if he'd only been there 1 year. About the Sorting Hat and the Great Hall and the library and the particular quality of walking somewhere that was old and the way that things were old when they'd been full of people for a very long time. I don't want him removed, Harry said. Amelia looked at him. From Hogwarts, Harry said. The administrative inquiry, the estate management, the property transfers, the seats, that should run its course. But Hogwarts, he thought about it. He's a good teacher. He's a bad administrator of other people's interests, but he's a good teacher and the school works because of him. He paused. I want the governance seats formally recognized as mine. I want the record to show they were improperly used. I want a real governor board that includes independent members who aren't influenced by the seats. He looked at Amelia. That's enough. Amelia stopped. You could push for much more. I know, Harry said. Some people will say you should. Some people aren't me. He picked up the document again. The mechanism is running. The record is accurate. That's what I said I wanted, and I meant it. Sirius was watching him with the expression he sometimes got, the one that combined something like grief with something like pride in a proportion that Harry didn't know how to look at directly yet. James, he said quietly, would have burned the whole place down. I know, Harry said. But his approach had a mixed record. Sirius made the sound that was becoming familiar, the rough, surprised laugh, the mechanism working better each time. Fair, he said. Dumbledore requested a meeting on the Thursday before term started. Harry agreed, without conditions this time. No legal representative, no formal meeting room. He went to Hogwarts the day before term, taking the Hogwarts Express route by Portkey with Sirius, who had been cleared to travel and who was, Harry had decided, and had told him directly, not going to be left alone in Grimmauld Place the night before Harry went back to school. The castle looked the same, which was somehow both obvious and remarkable. Stone and towers and the lake doing its usual thing with the light, and the grounds with the particular smell of early September, cut grass and cold water and something underneath both that was just, Hogwarts, a smell that had no other name. Sirius stopped on the path from the gate and looked at it. I haven't been here since 7th year, he said. What was it like? Harry asked. Being back. The first time after everything. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Ask me again when I've been inside, he said. They went inside. Dumbledore met them in the entrance hall, which Harry appreciated. It was neutral ground, inside the castle but before any of the specific rooms with their specific associations. He had his usual robes on, the midnight blue, and he looked at Sirius with the complex expression of a man confronting the specific weight of a mistake made and unmade. Sirius, he said. Albus, said Sirius. His voice was steady, which Harry thought cost him something. It's a long conversation. It is, Dumbledore agreed. I hope we'll have it. We will, Sirius said. Not today. Dumbledore nodded. He looked at Harry. Thank you for coming. Shall we walk? They walked. Sirius peeled off toward the Quidditch pitch with the intention of looking at it, he said, for the nostalgic experience, though Harry suspected he also wanted to give the conversation space. The grounds were empty in the specific way of a school the day before its students arrived, everything prepared and waiting. The inquiry findings, Dumbledore said. Yes, said Harry. I've read them. He walked with his hands behind his back, looking at the grounds. I will not contest them. The factual findings are accurate. He paused. I am asking the Board of Governors to conduct the confidence review as required. I'm making all relevant documentation available. I know, said Harry. Amelia told me. I want to tell you something, Dumbledore said. Not as a defense, and not as an explanation that excuses anything. As an accounting. He stopped walking. They were near the lake, and the giant squid was doing its usual thing in the shallows, an enormous tentacle breaking the surface with the indifferent grace of something that had been here longer than the castle and would be here long after. I made decisions in 1981 that were not mine to make. I told myself they were necessary. I told myself that I understood the situation better than anyone else, and that understanding gave me the right to act on behalf of people who had made different choices. He looked at Harry. I was wrong. Not about the threat. Voldemort was real, and his return is still a possibility I take seriously. But I was wrong to think that my understanding of the threat gave me authority over the people in its path. Harry looked at the lake. There is a prophecy, Dumbledore said, and Harry turned. About you. It was made before your birth. It says that you and Voldemort are connected. That the one cannot survive while the other lives. He said it plainly, without the packaging that Harry might have expected. I have been managing you in relation to that prophecy since November 1981. Managing me, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. Keeping you where I thought you needed to be. Keeping you, small. He said the word with the specific weight of someone who has chosen it carefully and is delivering it as payment for something. I told myself it was protection. It was also control. Harry looked at him for a long time. What's the prophecy? Dumbledore told him. Harry listened. He listened to the whole thing, the language of it, the specifics, the particular way that prophecies worked, which was oblique and conditional and susceptible to interpretation in ways that could consume a person if they let them. When Dumbledore finished, Harry looked at the lake again. Okay, he said. Dumbledore waited. The prophecy says I have a power he doesn't know, Harry said. That one of us has to kill the other. That he marked me as his equal. He turned it over. It doesn't say when. It doesn't say how. It doesn't say I have to do it alone, or from a position of disadvantage, or while living in a cupboard. No, said Dumbledore. It doesn't say any of those things. Then it changes the stakes, Harry said. Not what I've been doing. He looked at Dumbledore. I've been building something. The houses, the seats, the legal position, I've been building it because it's right and because the record should be accurate. But it's also useful. He paused. When Voldemort comes back, and I think he will, based on what happened in the forest last year, I'm not going to be facing him as a boy with no family and no position and no allies who doesn't know what he is. He said it without bravado, without the weight of drama. Just fact. That's different from what you planned for me. Yes, said Dumbledore quietly. It is. I think it's better, Harry said. I think it might be, Dumbledore said. And this, Harry could tell, cost him more than the inquiry cooperation, more than the documentation releases, because it was the specific admission that the thing he'd built had been inferior to the thing that had dismantled it. Harry nodded once. I'll see you at the feast tomorrow. He walked back toward the castle, and Dumbledore stayed by the lake, and the giant squid moved in the shallows, and the evening came in over the forbidden forest with the particular quality of endings that were also beginnings. Term started on a Friday. The express arrived at 6:08, and the great hall was exactly as Harry remembered it, the enchanted ceiling doing its September evening thing, candles, the 4 long tables with their house colors, the noise of 500 students finding their places, all of it familiar in the specific way of places that become familiar quickly because they contain something essential. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table. He arrived with the other students, walked through the entrance hall in the crowd, sat down in the same row he'd used last year. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't do anything that required an entrance. But the 4 rings were on his hands, and people noticed them in the way that people notice things that were new on someone they thought they knew, and the noticing rippled outward through the hall in the way that things did in enclosed spaces full of people. Neville sat beside him, which was new. Neville had been at a different part of the table last year, not by design, just by the accident of where people sat, but he sat beside Harry tonight with the deliberateness of someone who had decided where he was going to be and gone there. Across the hall, at the Hufflepuff table, Susan found Harry's eyes when she sat down and gave him a nod that was brief and entirely sufficient. He nodded back. Luna was at the Ravenclaw table, reading a magazine that Harry suspected was the Quibbler and specifically the issue with his interview in it, which she was reading with the focused serenity of someone who had helped produce a thing and was checking its accuracy. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was talking to Crabbe and Goyle with the slightly distracted manner of someone who was paying attention to something else. He found Harry across the hall. He didn't nod or gesture or signal anything. He just met Harry's eyes, acknowledged them, and looked away. Which was, Harry thought, the right call. September. They'd have the conversation when they had it. Dumbledore rose for the start of term address. He looked, Harry thought, slightly different than he had before, not diminished, not defeated, but differently situated, the way someone looked when they'd been carrying something at the wrong angle and had put it down and picked it up correctly. He gave the address with all his usual warmth and precision, welcomed the new students, and then he looked, briefly, at Harry's end of the Gryffindor table. Not significantly. Not for long. Just a look. Harry met it and then reached for the pumpkin juice. After the feast, after the new Gryffindors had been sorted and the food had been and gone, after the first years had been led up to the tower by the prefects and the older students were finding their way back to their common rooms, Harry stopped on the steps outside the Great Hall and looked up. The entrance hall ceiling was not enchanted, unlike the Great Hall, but there was a window at the top of the stairs, and through it the September sky was doing something extravagant with the stars, the kind of sky that only happened away from cities, the kind that made the scale of things clear in a way that was either overwhelming or steadying depending on who you were. Neville stopped beside him. "All right?" Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. He thought about the question honestly. "I think so." "It's been a strange summer," Neville said. "It has," Harry agreed. "Good strange?" Harry looked at the stars. He thought about Privet Drive, about the cat flap, about the cracked glasses and the lock on the outside of the door. He thought about Amelia's knock at 5:47 in the morning and the Edinburgh safe house kitchen and Ragnarok's office 3 levels underground and the courtroom where Augusta had read her statement in a steady voice while pressing her quill too hard into the parchment. He thought about Sirius in the kitchen, warming his hands around a mug, saying "You have Lily's eyes" in a voice that still had 11 years of rough in it. He thought about the rings. About the warmth of them, structural now, as natural as his own hands. "Yes," he said. "Good strange." They went up the stairs. Behind them, the great hall settled into its after-feast quiet, and the candles guttered down, and the enchanted ceiling cycled toward midnight, star by star. 3 weeks into term, the Board of Governors completed their confidence review and issued their finding. Dumbledore retained his position as headmaster, subject to a restructured board that now included 3 independently appointed members, none of whom held Wisengamot seats that had been subject to the administrative inquiry. The governance seats were formally registered in the Hogwarts Charter as belonging to Lord Harry Potter, who had indicated in writing that he intended to exercise them only in cases of material concern to the school students. Lucius Malfoy resigned from the Board of Governors the same day. The resignation letter, which became public record, cited personal reasons. Clearwater, who had seen the letter before it was filed, told Harry it was one of the most diplomatically written documents she'd encountered in her career, which was a distinct type of compliment. The Sirius Black Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act was put before the Wisengamot in October. Augusta Longbottom co-sponsored it with Tiberius Ogden. It passed with 31 votes in favor. Dumbledore abstained, which was, as Amelia observed, the most politically honest thing he'd done in years. Sirius spent the autumn putting Grimmauld Place back together. He hired a decorator, which Tonks said was the most unexpected thing she'd ever seen a Black do, and he threw out 3 rooms worth of dark artifacts that Ragnarok's office catalogued and assessed, and he found a room at the top of the house that had been his as a boy and stood in it for a while and then turned it into a library, because the thing it had been could stay in the past and the thing it could become was better. Harry came most Hogsmeade weekends. Sometimes with Neville, sometimes with Susan, once with Luna, who examined the Grimmauld Place library with scholarly interest and identified 2 books that she believed contained evidence of Nargol territorial behavior, which Sirius received with the openness of a man who had decided that peculiarity was not a disqualifier. They played Exploding Snap. Harry was getting better at the technique. In November, 2 years to the month before Harry's 3rd year would begin, an owl arrived at Gryffindor Tower addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize, spiky, urgent, like the hand of someone writing fast because the thought was moving faster than the quill. The letter was from the Azkaban Administrative Office. It was a notification that the inquiry into the 1981 arrest procedures had identified 11 cases, in addition to Sirius Black's, where prisoners had been committed without trial in the weeks following Voldemort's fall. 11 cases. 11 people who had been where Sirius had been. Harry read the letter twice. He went to Amelia's flu address at Hogwarts, she'd given him standing permission months ago, and he sent a message. She came through in 5 minutes in her off-duty robes with a cup of tea, took the letter, read it, and looked at him. 11, she said. All of them need reviewing, Harry said. Yes, said Amelia. They do. I want to be part of it. She looked at him steadily. You're 12. I know, Harry said. I've heard that. He held her gaze. I can contribute. I've been doing it all summer. I have the position and the resources and the legal standing to contribute, and 11 people who should have had trials didn't, and I'm not going to look at the letter and go to Transfiguration. Amelia looked at the letter. She looked at him. We'll need to establish a formal review committee, she said. It'll need to be structured properly. I won't run a sloppy process just because the cause is right. The cause being right is more reason to run it correctly, not less. I know, Harry said. I'd expect nothing else. She almost smiled. It was very controlled and very brief. I'll begin the filing tomorrow, she said. You'll have documentation within the week. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, she said, the way she always said it. This is what the work is for. She went back through the flu. Harry sat in the common room with the notification letter and thought about 11 people in cells saying the true thing to people who wrote it down and did nothing. Not anymore. He put the letter in his folder, a new one, this, the 3rd since summer, and went to Defense Against the Dark Arts, where Professor Lupin, who was new this year and who had known his father and who looked at Harry sometimes with the particular expression of someone carrying something heavy that they hadn't told him about yet, was teaching the class something about boggarts. Harry sat in the back row with Neville on his left and worked on the ridiculous charm, and the boggart flickered between forms when it reached him, trying to find the thing, searching for the image, and settled, finally, on a figure that dissolved as quickly as it formed, because Harry Potter had decided, 11 weeks ago on the morning of his 12th birthday, that he was not going to be afraid. And he meant it.